Good evening. I would like to call to order the March 23rd, 2026 Lake Washington School Board meeting. Let the record reflect that all board members are present, and we have two of our student reps, James and Suniri. The board values public participation and engagement in the meetings of the board. Board meetings will continue to be live streamed on the LWSD website and are available for viewing following the conclusion of the board meeting as well. The public are always welcome to email the board at boardmembers@lwsd.org. Director Richter, would you like to read our land acknowledgement tonight?
The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District acknowledges that our district is on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights on this land, including the Duwamish and the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived here since time immemorial. We commit to continue collaborating with our Native community to teach the indigenous history of this land and these local tribes to all children of the district. We also commit to provide the best possible education for all children of Native descent who attend our schools.
Thank you. I will now entertain a motion to approve the March 23rd, 2026 agenda.
I move to approve the agenda with one modification, that we move the superintendent report to immediately follow the legislative update. So it would follow item 7 and would be new item 8 on the agenda.
Director LaLiberty has moved to approve the agenda with the superintendent report moved to item number 8 after the legislative update. Is there a second?
Seconded.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Richter to approve the agenda with that change of moving up the superintendent's report. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. We have a recognition this evening for School Library Month. Director Yoakum.
Whereas school libraries provide materials for teachers and students that will encourage growth and knowledge, and whereas the school library media specialist role is to provide the leadership and expertise necessary to ensure the library program is an integral part of the instructional program of the school, and whereas school libraries provide materials to meet individual needs, varied interests, abilities, socioeconomic backgrounds, and maturity levels of the students served, and whereas school libraries provide materials that reflect the ideas and beliefs of religious, social, political, historical, and ethnic groups in their contributions to the American and the world heritage and culture. And whereas the school library contributes to the individual growth and development of all students while fostering both excellence and equity in education. Therefore, we, the members of the Lake Washington School District Board of Directors, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2026 as School Library Month in Lake Washington School District.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda will be public comment. The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District welcomes the public to the business meetings of the board. We appreciate and value community engagement. We dedicate 30 minutes for public comment, with each speaker provided up to 2 minutes. This is a time for the board to listen. Please do not expect a response to your comments. Speakers will be called in the order of sign up. If there is not enough time to get to all individuals that have signed up, you may email your comments to boardmembers@lwsd.org. If you have materials to share with the board, please place them in the basket next to the podium. A timer will be displayed to help manage time. It will turn yellow at 30 seconds remaining and red at 10 seconds. The microphone will be turned off shortly after time expires, so please conclude your remarks promptly. We ask everyone to model respectful discourse. Please refrain from audience comments or prolonged applause so we can hear from as many speakers as possible. After public comment concludes, those not staying for the remainder of the meeting are asked to exit quietly. Public comment sign up is available on the district website and closes at noon on the day of the meeting. Speakers may designate another person in advance of the deadline. Substitutions at the meeting cannot be accommodated. Finally, the board does not address personnel matters during meetings. We encourage individuals to first work with school or district staff to resolve concerns. Please also refrain from naming students unless you are their parent or guardian. Public comment will now commence at 7:06 p.m. We have one speaker, Robert Ragnow.
Tonight I want to talk about the tests used to decide which children get highly capable services. Lake Washington uses 3 assessments as the basis for highly capable placement: SBA and FastBridge for academics and COGAT for cognitive ability. All are screening tools designed to efficiently sort large groups of students. None are designed to make precise, high-stakes placement decisions at the extreme top of the score distribution. COGAT, the sole test Lake Washington administers for high-cap identification, has a standard age score with a standard deviation of 16. The standard error measurement on individual batteries is roughly 4 to 5 points. The district requires a score of the 98th percentile for full-time Quest. A child who scores 96th percentile has a confidence interval that stretches well into 98th percentile and above. On a different day, that same child might score 98th. A score of 98th percentile has a confidence band easily stretching from the low 90s to the high 99s. COGAT's own score reports show confidence bands around every score for this reason. The publisher is telling you do not treat these as exact numbers. In this district, COGAT of 98 is a hard gate for Quest, psychometrically invalid and conflicting with state law, disallowing any single criterion to disqualify. FastBridge has the same problem on the academic side. It was built as a multi-tiered support screener. Its benchmarks are designed to flag students at risk of falling behind: high risk, low risk, advanced. It was never engineered to distinguish among the highest performing students. At the top of the distribution, the measurement is least precise. Every parent whose child scored 95th or 97th percentile on the COGAT and was denied Quest should understand your child may be psychometrically indistinguishable from the children who are admitted. The test cannot reliably tell them apart. To underscore this, if 2 students scored 95th and 98th percentile today, the chance that the rank order of their scores is reversed on a retest is 33%. Even if they scored 90 and 98th percentile, there's a 10% chance that a retest reversed the order. These are blunt screening instruments being used by the district to make sharp, life-altering cuts. The hard percentile gates where they are least accurate is not rigor, it's avoidable error. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes public comment. Thank you for taking the time to engage with the board this evening. As we continue with the meeting, we ask that all attendees remain respectful and follow standard meeting protocols, including minimizing side conversations and keeping voices low. If you choose to leave at this time, please do so quietly and in an orderly manner so the board can continue its meeting. Thank you again for your participation. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the March 23rd, 2026 consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Meekhoff. Superintendent Holman, will you please pull the board?
I will. Director Yoakum,
Yes.
Director Richter,
Yes.
Director Meekhoff,
Yes.
Vice President LaLiberty,
Yes.
and President Guthrie.
Yes, motion carries. Superintendent Holman, will you please review the donations?
Yes. So tonight in the board's packet, you have over $73,000 in donations, and we just want to say thank you to the Alcott PTSA, Smith PTSA, Evergreen PTSA, Renaissance PTSA, Rose Hill PTSA, and the Juanita Booster Club for those donations. They truly do provide unique opportunities for our students and our schools.
Thank you. Dr. Holman, do you or staff have a legislative update?
We do have an end of session update tonight, and so at this meeting we typically have gone through kind of the overall bills that we were tracking, maybe some that popped up at the end and things like that, but just to provide a summary of the legislative session. So tonight Associate Superintendent Posthumus will provide that update.
Good evening. Okay, good evening. Can you hear me? It's on. Good evening. Good evening. There we go. All right. Okay, as Dr. Holman mentioned, tonight I'm going to provide the final update on the legislative session and where things ended with our legislative priorities. Some of these slides are repeats from each of our, so I will go through some of them quickly and then spend some more time on others. So we know this was a tough session. Our legislators made it clear that the focus of this session would be on writing the supplemental budget within the constraints of the forecasted budget deficit and creating new revenue streams. The session ended on March 12th. We testified 32 times this year on 22 individual bills. We communicated directly with our legislators at key times, like committee or floor passage of big bills. Considering the deficit, we knew some bills were predetermined, but it was still important to voice our opinions. I'll highlight some of the places where our advocacy paid off throughout the presentation. Just a reminder, these were our priorities that the board approved at a November 3rd board meeting. We focused on our urgent priorities, or the big three, which was special education, MSOC, and transportation. So those are these priorities: fully fund special ed, adjust MSOC funding to support the needs of today, and update the transportation funding formula. One of our highest priorities is special education. As a reminder, out of our $90 million budget for special education, the state and federal only funds a portion of these costs. There is a significant budget gap, which is currently $22.2 million, that we have been asking our legislature to close this gap. So, on this chart, kind of at the end of the session, we put a check mark if they made progress, and a big red X if they did not. And so you can see that of our big three categories, there was really no movement and no progress on these categories. So after last year's progress, many members felt that they had done enough. We continue to advocate, but we unfortunately did not expect them to do much. So just some highlight, Senator Wellman did continue to try to work on these needs. Specifically, she introduced bills that would have provided about $3 million more in additional revenue for our materials, supplies, and operating costs, and well as restore the transportation safety net. Both bills had hearings, but were never scheduled for executive sessions. The other thing that we've been working on for the last 3 years is our update the non-voted debt rules to be consistent with other capital funding rules. And so the good news is there's a check mark on this. The third time was the charm. House Bill 1796 was passed by the Senate and concurred on the House on the 59th day of the session, so 1 day to spare. It came out with 2 amendments to help overcome some objections. Senator McCune added an amendment confirming that the approved capital levy will be used to repay the LGO bonds, and requires district that use the front funding to delay receiving SCAP, that's school construction assistance funding, for 2 years. And so that addressed concerns about the impact. There were concerns about the impact of SCAP, even though there wasn't any impact. So we testified at every single hearing. We met with legislators and staff and built a coalition to support this bill. And despite some hiccups, it ultimately passed both House and Senate. Governor Ferguson is scheduled to sign the bill in Olympia tomorrow, and Dr. Holman will be going down to Olympia to be present at the signing. And the effective date will be 90 days from the end of session, which is June 10th. All right, the other areas that we continue to focus on is no unfunded mandates, simple majority for school bonds, and enhancing staffing allocations. So there were some progress on some good things on unfunded mandates, and some continued unfunded mandates. Simple majority nor staffing received any attention this session. But we talked significantly with our legislators about unfunded mandates, and we were generally successful in getting bills changed to offer more flexibility or have less impact. And this is an area where a unified message from districts across the state got the attention of our legislators. The largest unfunded mandate and one of our top concerns was the expanded sales tax, which was imposed on temporary contract staffing such as OTPTs, school language pathologists, and other specialists, and other items that we rely on such as security and technology services. We estimated the impact on our district, Lake Washington, to be between 1.5 to 2 million that we had not planned for in our budget. So the new sales tax went into effect October 2025, but there was a 6-month waiver for existing contracts that were signed before October. So we spent a lot of time in our pre-session legislative meetings, including with Senate Majority Leader Peterson sharing the impacts. They agreed that the inclusion of the districts was unintended, but they kind of didn't give us any certainty that they'd be able to make some changes. Fortunately, at the end of session, the millionaire's tax, Senate Bill 6346, which was introduced late in the session, included in that bill was a sunset on the expanded sales tax and a waiver, an exemption for school districts that goes into effect July 1. So we'll still be responsible for taxes from April to June this year, but again, this is very good news for school districts. So this is a list, and I'm not going to go through all the bills, but of unfunded mandates that passed out of the session. And of the bills that we estimated were underfunded, about half were approved by the legislature. The bills that passed generally have workload impacts rather than direct, easy to estimate, expenditure impacts. All of the bills that passed were amended in response to testimony. Just a couple that I'll highlight. House Bill 1295 called for adopting new K-4 literacy curriculum. We testified about the importance of adequate investment to execute the proposal. So the final bill requires implementation during district's regular curriculum adoption cycle, but there is no funding associated with it. House Bill 2594, the legislature passed a bill mirroring the federal McKinney-Vento requirements and put those same requirements into state law. We expressed concern with that because the federal law requires districts to transport unhoused students to their original school, which is important for continuity for students. The challenge is it's unfunded. And our district spends, and many districts across the state, we spend $2 million in transportation costs to meet the federal requirement. So we asked for the state, if they're going to put it in place, to put funding with it. They did not do that. Senate Bill 5841 required all students to complete a financial aid form or get a parent waiver as part of their high school and beyond plan. We testified that would have required staff time to ensure compliance. So the final version of the bill requires the high school and beyond platform to incorporate financial aid applications, but not require students to complete it. So that was, again, better workload reduction. All right, so these are unfunded mandate bills that did not pass. I'll just highlight one bill, Senate Bill 2160, which would have expanded benefits for part-time substitutes. And again, we didn't object to the intent of the bill, but it would have expanded an unfunded program. So we worked to educate the legislatures on this issue, and so they set the bill aside. So the other things that we focused on were evidence-based literacy, digital equity, and sustainable transportation and construction. We didn't expect to spend a lot of time on these issues, but there was some activity. So one of our newer priorities is to provide ample and equitable funding for adoption and implementation of literacy practices. acquisition practices. We've already talked about House Bill 1295 and 6192. But they did not provide funding. And then as noted earlier, that House Bill 1295 was adopted by the legislature without any funding. So, and then I'll talk about, on the next slide, we called this the kitchen sink bill because it included a lot of different things in it, but 6260 has a negative impact on our transportation efforts. The bill saves state money by extending the depreciation schedule on our buses from 8 years to 10 years for small buses and 13 to 15 years for larger buses. And it eliminates depreciation for electric school buses that have been grant funded, which our four were. So there's an immediate impact of $230,000 per year on top of the increased maintenance costs of our aging buses. And so this reduction expires after the 27-28 school year, so hopefully districts will be made whole, but we don't really know. The other thing 6260 also did is reduced statewide programs such as Transition to Kindergarten, Local Effort Assistant, and Running Start. So each of these programs were expanded in the last couple of years, and so we testified again that we didn't support these cuts, and we're disappointed that they rolled back these programs that they had just recently added. So other bills that we supported outside of our priorities, House Bill 2320 prohibits the manufacturing of certain firearms and components using 3D printers. And so this bill is expected to be signed by the governor tomorrow afternoon. And then House Bill 2557 ensures that parents receive special education evaluation reports with enough time to read them before placement meetings. We agree that this was a good policy and testified in support of that. House Bill 2459 allows school districts to build schools outside the urban growth area. While this wouldn't immediately affect our district, even though we do own property outside the urban growth area, we testified to support other districts that are urgently needing to build schools on property that they own. And then finally, Senate Bill 6263 would have saved staff workload by adjusting public bid limits. This was really an easy one that we're disappointed that they did not pass. It was a no-cost proposal. So we hope they will bring that one back next year. And finally, I just want to highlight what we do after each legislative session. We analyze the legislative changes and the impact specifically for the state legislative changes to our budget. So this table shows the estimated revenues and required expenditures for next year due to these actions. So I just want to remind everyone that when the state, as part of the state budget, they determine a COLA percentage for school districts, but they only fund state-funded staff and then the salaries that they set. And so districts have to spend more money when there's a state COLA for all district staff. So the revenue, we will get more revenue, but we will be required to spend even more expenditures. So there's really a net loss, in a sense, of almost $4 million for the state because of the state COLA. And then the School Employee Benefits Board, they increased those rates by 5.1%. We're required to pay this amount for all employees, regardless whether they waive due to typically having insurance elsewhere. So that's another 2.4 in revenue and about 2.5 in expenditures. And then they did a little small thing with transitional bilingual funding. They increased the amount OSPI can withhold from our allocation. So they give us an allocation, and then they withhold 1% for OSPI to do centralized assessments. And so that's reducing about $60,000 in our budget. And then basic ed, we talked about material supplies and operating costs. That the additional revenue of 1.4 represents a 2.6% inflation increase. And now, well, you'll see there's no new required expenditures from the state, but we know that our fixed costs for property and liability insurance and utilities eat up this new revenue. So there's really not a lot left for new supplies in our schools. We have already been told by our risk pool to expect an 18% increase for next year. That's the equivalent. That's about 1.2 to 1.4 million in new costs after they've been going up about $1 million each year for the last many years. Small adjustments in state grants. They reduced the beginning educator support program to only support first-year teachers. And so again, we'll assume those expenditures will live within the new revenues. And we're waiting to find out. OSPI directly was, they were cut about $700,000, so they have to determine which OSPI funded grants will be reduced. And so we don't know if those will impact us yet. We will probably find, their goal is to tell us by April 1st. And so, and then we talked about the Transportation Vehicle Fund, which reduces bus depreciation allocations. So as they do, most years, our revenues increase due to the changes in state funding, but our expenditures will increase beyond that. The total impact is around $3 million, but when you add insurance utility requirements, it's about $4.5 to $5 million. So, and just finally, we will do our post-session wrap-up with our legislators and hold them in April and May, and then begin working for next year. So, and it's an election year for our House representatives and Senator Slatter and Dingra, which means they're less available in the fall, and so that will push our pre-session meetings to later in the fall. So.
Can you remind us the transportation depreciation? Did
Yes.
this also include not recognizing federal grant dollars for EV buses?
Yes. So if you received grants for your EV buses, they will not be included in the depreciation schedule.
Okay.
So it kind of goes against kind of their priorities to increase EV. So.
Director Liberty, you have a question?
I'll see if I can put a question mark at the end of it. Something was in my mind. I want to say it out loud before I forgot. The millionaire's tax has in the bill a null and void clause where if the income tax component of that bill is struck down by the Washington Supreme Court, then the entire bill is void. And so it's nice that the legislature undid the thing that they said they were surprised about doing and charging sales tax. I'm not sure it's totally intellectually honest to do it in that bill with a null and void clause. And so I just want to flag that as something. It's like we probably should keep that as a priority, something to keep talking about, because there's more than a non-zero chance, or there is a non-zero chance that it will be struck down. And so continuing to make sure that's something we're talking about at the legislature. If that does happen, they still have to fix the problem that they created. Okay. There was no question. I couldn't figure out how to make that a question.
Your question was just, can we add that to our legislative platform moving forward? Because they could actually fix it before it's vetted in the courts. There's a couple things I want to add, just some data elements. I am fortunate through the board's request to advocate beyond just Lake Washington School District. So I'm part of superintendent networks across the state, of which otherwise I wouldn't be involved with. Small school districts, rural school districts, and I was on an email today related to the three legislative reductions, LEA, transitional kindergarten, and the depreciation fund. And it's a stark reminder of the damage that is going to be done from this legislative session. And so I just pulled the data related to Ferndale School District. The reduction in LEA, which they were promised last session. So this is an increase that they were promised, and they're seeing an increase over this year, but a reduction in what they were promised. And so if you do the mental gymnastics. Good budget planning means you assume those new dollars in your budget moving ahead so that you can plan for them. So for Ferndale, they're going to lose $465,000. In Lake Washington, that's not a huge hit, but for us, if it was the same type of reduction, it would be over $3 million. And so for a school district like Ferndale, that's, 3.5 to 4 teachers. You can start quantifying. And when you're serving 4,000 students in 12 or 15 schools, those become devastating cuts. And these are cuts in a budget that they planned for. They assumed these dollars. They put contracts in place. And so now they have to go through the process of figuring out where do these dollars come from. And so the damage done with the change in LEA is true for all of our districts across the state, because it's a reduction in $100 per pupil. That's a pretty easy calculation to figure out the exact reduction. And then you think of, what does that mean for budgets that are already extremely tight? Like if we had to go find $3 million in our budget today, those are deep and devastating cuts. And those are real. The part of this email that I received, it was sent out to districts that participate in tribal consultation. And so we're one of those. We're Title VI recipient, and so we have the honor of engaging with our local tribes related to our Native education program. And of those districts, of those 39 districts that participate in tribal consultation, 25 of those districts receive LEA. So you think about the disproportionate impact on students furthest from educational justice that these types of cuts have. And of those 25 school districts, 14 have transitional kindergarten. And what do we know about transitional kindergarten? It truly is a pathway to increased opportunity and access for students. And so, and then as we think about the state's quote unquote commitment to climate justice, sustainability, whatever term you want to use, and then for them to indicate, well, any dollars received through federal grants related to electric vehicles won't be considered in depreciation. It's just, there's irony there, and it's unfortunate. And so while there were some positives in this session, specifically for Lake Washington, I'm very disappointed that these are the conversations that we're having to have, and primarily for our districts who are in greatest need. So that's my summary of the session.
Any other comments, questions? Yeah, I'll say that Director Yoakum and I were at Leadership WASDA last Thursday and Friday, with directors from across the state as well. And yes, there was a ton of concern around LEA and transitional kindergarten. And there was just a article set out, I forget which district it was talking about, but they saw after implementing transitional kindergarten, and I think preschool was wrapped up in there too, their WAKIDS data for kindergarten readiness went from something like 19% to I think 70 or 80% over like a 3-year period. So the benefits of these programs, and then listening to my fellow directors wrestling with, we need to notify teachers by May 1st whether or not they are going to have jobs next year, was really sobering and heartbreaking. All right, sorry. Moving on. The next item on our revised agenda is the superintendent report. Dr. Holman.
Okay, well, I appreciate being able to share my superintendent's report after the legislative update, and it is squarely in alignment with the state's paramount duty. And we've all heard people say, well, it's in the Constitution in Washington State. Well, it actually is in the Constitution. It's Article 9, Section 1 of the Washington State Constitution, and it actually states it is the paramount duty of the state of the state is to make ample provision for the education of all children residing within its borders without distinction or preference on account of race, color, caste, or sex. That is what was codified into the Constitution. I believe it was in the 1800s. So that has been in effect for many, many years. And tonight, my comments are related to the ample provision of that. And as a board, you're well aware, and tonight I'm publicly sharing, and tomorrow we'll be sharing specifically with all Lake Washington School District staff, and then on Thursday with all families and recipients of our Connections newsletter, that in January we sent a demand letter to the legislature. And we said that it is time for action. We didn't qualify that. We didn't ask if you have to do this other thing first, it's okay. We said the time is now for you to take action related to funding of public schools in the state of Washington. I've been in legislative meetings with our delegation, I think going on somewhere between 12 and 15 years. And every year we talk with our legislators about ample funding, and we talk about small little moves, and we talk about small adjustments that are made, and there's patting on the back when they increase funding by 1%, yet costs go up by 3%. I mean, this has occurred for years and years and years. And so for me, I appreciate this board understanding where we are at this point in time. McCleary was supposed to be the fix, and I would say school districts are worse off today than they were when the funding system was fixed. And so we sent a demand letter giving the legislature this session to take action. And if they fell short of taking action and fixing the system, that we would use all means available, including legal means, to hold them accountable. And in my estimation, there's three core failures. First is just the chronic underfunding. We have been talking about persistent multi-year funding gaps. These aren't things that crop up once in a while. These are persistent, pervasive funding gaps for every school district in the state of Washington. Lake Washington is not unique in this situation. We are just one of 295 examples of this chronic underfunding. Structural inadequacy. The formulas that are used to provide funding to school districts are so woefully inadequate, it's almost like it's intentionally to misunderstand what actually happens in school districts. Like, they're so far away from reality, and if we dig into the actual models for funding staff positions, the one that we have pointed to many times and just screams inadequacy is the funding of school psychologists. For our school district, I believe the model produces about 4 school psychologists. For anyone who understands public schools, public education, and the requirements that we have would know that that's not even in the realm of adequate. And the other is misaligned priorities. One of the greatest examples is the reduction in the percent of the state budget that is being allocated to the state's paramount duty. Around McCleary, it was about 50% of the overall state budget. We're down to 43%. Not only is that not keeping up with the needs of our students, our staff, our communities, it's not even taking into consideration inflationary pressures. So we're not even keeping pace with what we had in 2017, 2018. And so, and then to be honest with you, I have heard from my colleagues across the state that the idea that the great accomplishment related to public schools this session was the funding of universal meals for students. No one is saying that it's a bad idea to fund universal meals. But when you don't actually fund your core requirements, that's where people start to get really irritated. And 70% of the students in the state of Washington already receive subsidized meals through various programs. And so just the misalignment of priorities, and unfortunately, I have to say it that way because the legislature for years has said, we prioritize public education. Well, the way you demonstrate that is through action. The way you demonstrate that is through standing up through the legislative process. The way you do that is not continuing to pass bills that don't fund public education. And so kind of the core principle of basic education, and whether I agree with this or not, the legislature gets to define what basic education is. Okay, if we live with that, then they have to fully fund that program of instruction. And that program of instruction has to be designed to ensure that all students develop the knowledge and skills to do two things: to one, meet graduation requirements, and two, be prepared for post-secondary. But it's their definition of basic ed. There's a funding model that I referenced earlier. It's called the prototypical funding model. And it essentially takes a hypothetical school with a hypothetical set of students, and it applies a formula for how many principals you get and how many teachers you get and how many counselors you get. Yep, it does all of that. And rather than actually funding what school districts need to run schools and run programs. And so, but this is the model, and you can actually find the model and you can apply it, and you would see it is woefully inadequate. And so, but this is the model that that funds what the state legislature claims is basic education, and it's not meeting their definition. And that really is the disconnect in the funding. And so a few things here. I mentioned this earlier, just the declining commitment over time. This is just blatant in my mind. 50% of the overall state budget was at 7 years ago, down to 43% in 2025. And so that relative investment has reduced over time, and primarily once the court reduced their oversight responsibilities. Some basic education funding gaps just here in Lake Washington. We have about 145 staff positions that are funded locally. And so when you think about that local funding being used for staff positions, $78 million overall in a staff shortage. And one of those those areas that just demonstrates the inadequacy of the model, we're required to provide substitutes. Yet the actual cost to fund substitutes is woefully off. And so the prototypical model, it definitely underfunds core operations, not just specialized services. And so I spoke about substitutes. And so we are provided funding for 4 days of leave annually. Staff receive 12 days of sick leave and have benefits to receive up to 16 weeks of paid leave for various reasons. And so that's a chasm. And that's where that $6 million for substitutes comes in. And so again, it's just a model that's disconnected from the realities of the day-to-day life of a school district, a school, and teachers. One of the examples that I want to spend a couple slides talking about is the funding for special education. And I started off saying that the legislature gets to define basic education, whether I agree with that or not. Well, they define special education, the program of special education, as part of basic education. So they have a responsibility to fully fund basic education, which includes special education. And to me, this is as stark and perfect example of how state funding is falling short of their constitutional obligation. And so if we just take the 24-25 school year, our overall budget was right around $87 million for the program of special education. We received revenue of $63 million between state and federal resources, and that left a shortfall of about $22 to $24 million for that program, which we use local levy dollars to cover that balance. And that has been consistent over years and years and years. Somewhere between $18 and $25 million annually has been spent from local levy dollars to cover the program of special education. And so, and again, it's not a one-time issue. This has been on our legislative platform since the first platform I can find. We were advocating for full funding for special education. And I can tell you this is not unique to Lake Washington School District. It is a statewide and it is a systemic issue. And so districts across the state spend about 26% more than they receive in revenue on their program of special education. And that is, when I say that is consistent, that is district by district by district. Every district in the state has a gap that is somewhere between about 22 upwards of 34%. The statewide totals in 22-23 was about $590 million. In 23-24, it was about $450 million. And yes, there was some additional revenue provided between those 2 years, and yet we're still $500 million away from fully funding the program of special education. And so, again, it is continuing to underfund school districts across Washington. And so, a couple of data points. As special education spending increased by about 2% inflation adjusted, the actual funding decreased by about 6% during that same time, inflation adjusted. And so we see this, we feel this, our schools know it, we're continuing to work on it centrally, but that the gap isn't about overspending. It's actually about declining funding opportunities as the cost of staffing services and other types of requirements actually increase. And so in the 25-26 budget, the Lake Washington School District received $1.6 million additional in revenue for the program of special education versus our shortfall of about $24 million. And so that just shows that the chasm between the efforts that the legislature is making and the actual need that specifically Lake Washington, but this is the need that all districts across the state have. The statewide increase was about $125 million, and that's about 1/3 of the actual gap. And so you'll hear comments around policy level adjustments and maintenance level adjustments. A maintenance level adjustment, for example, is their requirement to provide the inflationary adjustment for staff salaries. That's maintenance level. Anytime additional dollars are allocated there. Policy level is where they go beyond any type of inflationary adjustment. And so the legislature's policy adjustments, they are not coming close to solving the problem right now. One of the things the legislature continues to point to as well, but we have safety net, meaning there's a way for school districts to recoup the additional costs for students whose programs exceed a certain threshold. And it's well and good. And when you spend $100,000 that goes beyond what you budgeted for a student, and then you get $100,000 in return, the net is zero. So you're not actually increasing funding, you're just recouping the dollars that you overspent in the first place. And so So we have worked diligently to establish a protocol that includes many, many staff, both centrally and in our schools, to submit applications for recoupment of funds for students on an annual basis. And so last year we submitted for recoupment of funds for about 317 students, which totaled about 12 to $14 million. Now, for those students, there's $5 million that we spent locally that because of the formula, we will never be able to recover. That's just the, if you will, the cost associated with the program. And so, while yes, it's great to be able to recoup some of the overspend, there's still, for every student, there's a massive gap between what we receive in funding, what we actually spend, and then what we can recover. And so, again, this system prevents being able to recover the full cost, and that is just for a number of students. We have over 3,000 students qualified for special education services. Okay, so a few things. First, Lake Washington will continue to be leaders in practice. We will continue to implement a program of basic education that includes our general education classrooms, our supports for our students with unique needs, our commitment to inclusionary practices. We will continue to be leaders. That will never change. And I appreciate the work that our staff has done, that our community has leaned into. I hear from our students about inclusion. I mean, the work that is going on right now is to be commended. Our work related to legislative advocacy, not only does it need to continue, it needs to be more precise and with a layer of accountability. I like our delegation. They are nice people. I like meeting with them. And they are the ones that have the responsibility to fulfill their constitutional duty. And so it's our responsibility to continue to elevate that, ask them how they're going to push this forward, because they're the only ones that can make this change. And last but not least, as I mentioned at the outset, legal accountability. We have worked with a firm that drafted the demand letter, and we will be taking next steps legally, because we have consistent action that demonstrates that advocacy alone, it won't be enough. And so we'll be notifying staff of that tomorrow, because I think they deserve to know. This is getting more and more attention with superintendents and boards, with people in Olympia, and so I think our staff need to know that if they see something or they're asked a question, that they can, at a minimum, answer that yes, they were aware. We'll share with our community and our Connections newsletter, and I'll continue to provide updates as we go through that process. So that's my superintendent's report tonight. Thought it was very appropriate to follow our legislative update.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. Moving on with the rest of our agenda. The next item on the agenda is secondary math adoption. Dr. Holman.
You know, talk about a bright spot. I mean, honestly, I mentioned how impressed I am with our staff, the work they do, going through the process of adopting a new curriculum. From the outside, it might sound like, oh, just like find a textbook and like purchase it. But the depth and complexity of of going through the process with fidelity, understanding the body of research and the literature, because the world changes between our 10-year, 12-year cycles of adopting curriculum. And so spending the time to become knowledgeable about current thinking and current practice, and it's an essential piece. And so, these are processes that take years, and we have staff that dedicate time, meaning they're out of their classrooms, they're away from their day-to-day jobs, which means they have to make sub-plans and then clean things up when they get back. I mean, it's just, there is just the amount of work, and then our central team that really orchestrates and puts this this body of work together so that tonight we can come to you as a board of directors to say, we have a recommendation to adopt a curriculum that as we implement, as we change practice, has the chance to truly close opportunity and achievement gaps. And that's what this board expects as we do this work. And so it's with that I welcome the team to come up. Dr. Rose, Director Fritz, I don't know who's going to lead this off, but the team has a rigorous presentation for the board tonight.
Yes, and I will hand off immediately to the team because they have done the heavy lift on this. The only comment I'd like to make is just to echo what Dr. Holman said. This arc in the journey of secondary math has been a work in progress for years and years and years. And thinking about the instruction in classrooms and the collaboration of teachers, I was sharing earlier that I think it was January of 2020 that I met with all the middle school principals in this room to think about instruction. And the teachers and the staff members that you will hear from tonight have really been carrying this work that is not, like Dr. Holman said, this is not just about instructional materials by a long shot. It is about a vision for student learning. It is about raising the ceiling, having the expectation that all students can think at high levels, and providing them access to be able to do so. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Fritz to lead the presentation.
Hello, everyone. And it feels like we were just in a study session talking about this. So we're going to review, I get the opportunity to just kind of review the process quickly, and then I'm going to turn a lot of the commentary over to these people behind me who will introduce themselves as they come up, because they're the ones you really want to hear from around this, what I think to be a very exciting thing of reaching that almost end of this recommendation, getting to plan for the implementation. So as a reminder, here is what our process has been. We start with forming a committee. We review instructional practices and research. We develop a rubric, review curricula, all the way to where we are right now, which is recommending to you the curriculum that this group has spent some time working with. So again, this started back in, as Dr. Rose said, a very long time ago, but the actual adoption process started in fall of 24, and we hope to be able to launch with our new curriculum this coming fall in the 2026-27 school year. And yes, it feels really weird to say 2026 and 2027. It's also really important when we do this work that we have a very diverse committee. So we had teachers from that were part of the committee from every single one of our, not every one of our choice schools, but every one of our secondary schools, with some minor, some of our choice schools weren't able to participate. We had specialists, we had building administrators, one of which you'll hear from tonight, community members, two of which you'll hear from tonight, and then we also had two different school board members who served as liaison observers during the process at different times. And to start with, we put out a request for information and wanted you to know we had 13 companies that submitted responses for our curriculum, and of those, we had 4 that met our minimum requirements. And those were the 4 that then we took to the committee to really look at. And those are the real the minimum requirements that we ask for. I'm not going to go into depth in that because we did that in the study session. We also want to make sure you know part of this process was ensuring that we screen for bias content throughout the process. Washington State OSPI has a tool that we use, but we also take components from that tool that are kind of infused all through the rubrics as we move along. And that process that I just went through in 3 slides was about a year, okay, a little over a year. And through that, we decided to pilot 2 different curriculum, Imagine Learning with illustrative math, and then also Amplified Desmos Math. And I'm going to pass this over now to Wendy to talk about how we came to that final recommendation that you're going to hear about tonight. So we'll pass this on to Wendy Robards, our math specialist.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. So last time we saw you all, we were in that point of being in the pilot, and then we gathered the committee together in the end of January and analyzed data from over 1,500 students, and including focus groups from students. We had teachers, of course, in our committee, but then we had 43 teachers who actually piloted and had opportunities to give us all of their feedback back on both materials. And of course, we have community information nights, and we seek community information from online materials and materials placed here. And we got to, of course, we cannot forget that we have this fabulous student feedback. One of the interesting responses about the materials that we ended up choosing, Amplified Desmos, is the difficulty curve for lessons feels natural. And I think you will see that as we go through this presentation. I thought, that really captures that in really great language. And I also really love the second one that says I liked how there were engaging activities that are all connected. And you'll see some examples of that in a few minutes here. So through our consensus process, which means that committee members vote, the voting body of the committee gives us a minimum of 80% consensus, and we did select Amplified Desmos Math by over 80% consensus after looking at all of our data, our student responses, our committee responses, and talking with all of our pilot teachers. So what about Amplified Desmos Math do we think was really special about this product? Number one, well, and I'm kind of going to go in a little nonlinear way here, but top right corner, problem sets are low floor, high ceiling. You're going to hear a little bit about what that might mean, but it means there's a really nice on-ramp for students, and then they meet grade level standards quickly and go beyond. Each lesson is built around that. They get to have real world problem contexts that really accent relevance of mathematics, not just pages of problems, but problems that have an actual context around them. Some of them are silly and some of them are fun, but they really illuminate our mathematics. We see these materials supporting our future-ready mindsets in perseverance, but also agency. I wanted to call out agency in that these materials really support students to believe that their own effort and ideas lead to successful learning. That's something we don't always see in mathematics, and something that I'm really dedicated to in our math program. So we're going to hear a little more about what you're going to see from students, but each lesson includes instructional. You would expect this from materials, but I think that one of the things that we see in this is that on a single page with a couple of tabs, we see the goals of the lesson, what the standards are, the supporting standards, and what we're going toward. Also, those instructional routines you'll see, we'll get to see teachers learn how to use those and leverage them for student success. We see support, strengthen, and stretch for every single lesson, so teachers can differentiate based on that. Our proficiency progression includes an activation of warm-up activities that help generate new ideas and refine, a synthesis, that really important closure of the lesson, and then students also, of course, always have that reinforcement, practice, extensions, remediations, what they need for learning. We look closely at accessibility for students. One thing I want to call out from the accessibility list is that a graphing calculator is integrated into this program that is also useful on other standardized tests throughout national testing. This is a tool that students talked about multiple times in our feedback of how much they liked just having it at hand. They will not necessarily need to buy their own calculator when they have this program. It's a real equity builder for us. So now we get to hear from two teachers who were pilot teachers and came to all of our committee meetings, really strong members of our committee, and we appreciate them very, very much.
Hi everyone, I'm Dean Willis. I teach Algebra 1 and Geometry at Lake Washington High School. What I'm going to walk through with you today are two different lessons I taught with Amplify. What I'm hoping you take away from my presentation is how some of my students experience these lessons, and more than that, how it showed them that sources of learning could come from themselves and not just the teacher. One of the advantages of having an online option with your curriculum is you can play games. This game on the screen is that little pink circle. That is a cup of worms. And the 3 chickens are all trying to make it to the cup of worms. And if you look at the bottom right corner, the first chicken is really happy, the other 2 not so much. The goal is quite mathematical. I need to find a center point that is equidistant from all 3 of the chickens. This screen was a game that just had them guess and check. Those white dots were failed guesses, while that black dot was the final success. Some of the things my students said when walking through this: guess and check isn't going to work. They were actually curious about what the mathematical process was to find that center point, because guess and check was pretty arduous. That they could only find one solution. Earlier in the lesson, they did the exact same game, but with 2 chickens, and when you add that third one, it got a lot harder. The mathematical idea that this actually gets at is circumscribed triangles. If you can draw a triangle through the starting point of a circle through the starting point of all 3 chickens, the center of that circle is equidistant. I could have absolutely had everyone get out their notebooks and gone through a step-by-step process. Let's just talk about how to circumscribe a circle on a triangle. If I did that, my students would have never asked any of these questions. Do we need all 3 sides of the triangle? No, you don't. You only need 2. How do you do this on paper? Even though the lesson was online, students were still curious. How do I transfer that to an actual pen and paper process? Does that mean there's only one solution? What about 4 chickens? We didn't get to the 4th chicken that day, but they were curious. The other lesson has a little bit more of a real-world connection, and that is a way that payday loans can scam their users. And how it does this is it explores how monthly interest and yearly interest are related. This is a great example of a really low floor and a really high ceiling. I even had a student who was gone the entirety of this unit. This was probably 3/4 of the way through the unit, but they were able to come in and they were able to participate in 90% of the lesson without any intervention from my part because there was such a low floor for them to on-ramp onto the lesson. What we have here is an advertisement of a payday loan, and all the students needed to know was, what do you notice? What do you wonder? Well, it looks like a scam. Why don't they care about credit? I would never trust anything that says get cash fast. Get cash fast. These are freshmen. These are students who, most of them don't have a bank account. Many of them do not have a credit card. The high ceiling of this lesson eventually gets to a point where students are exploring that a 15% monthly interest is equivalent to a 435% yearly interest. So when you are missing your payment on a 15%, interest, over a year, it is not a 15% penalty. It is much, much greater in consequence. Even if not every student reached that high ceiling on their own, I could come back at the end of class, leave everyone at the same point. And one thing that any student can do is looking at expression B, a 3-year deal with 12 months per year. That is expression that showed up on their test, because 12 times 3 is 36. One thing that I also want to mention is that the pace at which students have gotten comfortable with this process has not been the same. I still hear something of like, Mr. Willis, why don't you just tell me how to do this? Students have been conditioned, by the time they get to me for the better part of a decade, to that learning comes from the teacher, and it is their job to replicate what I give them as learning. One thing I really love about Amplify is it gives me a lot of tools to teach them that learning can come from their previous knowledge, learning can come from each other, and it still does come from me, but it doesn't only come from me.
Hello, I'm Dave Levitin, and I've taught at Timberline since it opened. At some point or another, I've taught every course we have in math from 6th grade to geometry. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a specific course. You can see at the bottom here, the 7th accelerated course that I piloted in Amplify Desmos. And Unit 4 is where most of the samples you're going to see are going to come from, and that was a unit on linear relationships and systems of linear equations. The flexibility and options is the thing I really wanted to highlight that the curriculum offers. Every lesson has a full digital version. You saw some great examples from Dean of those, and you'll see some from me in a minute. In addition, every lesson has a full PDF version, which could be printed and done on paper. And the lessons are also really well designed and allow you to use like whiteboards or vertical whiteboard surfaces, as many of our teachers have done building thinking classroom training. And I actually did some of the lessons in that way as well. And so let's just start the very first view of the very first lesson of this unit. Okay, whole class mode here, because we have that flexibility. So there you've got a picture. And what I want you to do is watch what happens as the picture becomes animated. And a couple questions I have for you is like, what are you kind of wondering? What are you noticing? Okay. All right, let's give you one more look at that, students. All right, and so this really kind of very welcoming, non-pressurized way to start a whole unit of learning on linear relationships. And the students, we had a good discussion about some of the things they noticed, and then they had a chance to make a little story up. And so here was one of the stories that were made by a student, and I love that the blue turtle never gives up. Some of the students' stories were more quantitative and mathematical than that, but you had a full range of responses there. And so we kind of got into it. Once again, that low floor, high ceiling was available even from that very first slide. Okay, from that point, the students now, we went into a small group partner mode. So just picture yourself with one other student, and you both have a laptop kind of between you, and you'll take turns actually entering the information on the slide, but the rule is you have to discuss and agree what you're going to put on there first. And so the students went through these linear relationships first, modeling linear relationships in a data table. Okay, then modeling linear relationships in a graph. And from that point, we got into the equation, and that's where the real fun began, because the students had an opportunity to take Turtle 4 in whatever direction they wanted to. And we had a lot of prior learning on, oh, he just made third place. We had a lot of prior learning related to equations already. And so this is one of those moments of joy that I saw multiple times as I taught Amplify Desmos, where people were going, show mine, it's really good, you know. And so we had funny turtles that, you know, basically almost were done with the race, but then barely made third place. We had teleporting turtles. We had turtles actually like, you know, slowly creeping backwards from the starting line after the race began. And so, and then other students were saying, you know, like, well, how did you do that? And So there was this really kind of organic learning going on between the students, understanding starting value and that constant that we would eventually think of as slope in that linear relationship. And so that discussion that you see at the bottom right, B, how does turtle race 4 compare to the other turtles, was a really rich one in the class. And from there, at the close of the lesson, we have a great option to check students individually. And so if you look at this slide, show what you know. A lot of times you could do this with partners, but a lot of times I'll do this with the individual students, either on paper or digitally. And it gives me a chance to get a quick dip formative assessment on every student in the room and help clarify any misunderstandings they are. So they'll do this, then we'll go into some practice. And so really great lessons and flexible options for all. And now you might be thinking, well, they're just going to stare at laptops all day. But Unit 3 was the unit we did right before this in full. It was a really important unit, so it lasted multiple weeks. Equations and inequalities. And it was about 50-50 as far as recommended directly by the curriculum maker, Amplify Desmos, on how many lessons you did digitally and how many you did on paper. And so you can see when we were doing that part of that lesson, part of that unit, we're solving multi-step equations, and so the students are kind of demonstrating their ideas of how to do it in different ways, and they're doing that on paper. And we also did some of these lessons in that vertical whiteboard model. And then they're making posters together. When we just made sure the presentation worked well, someone pointed out to me that we got Recipe 2 and Recipe 1. Pie's good though, so I think that's okay. Anyways, so they have a lot of really great options to do lessons in this curriculum.
Hi, I'm Nikki Casaro. I lowered that a little too much. I'm the building principal of Kirkland Middle School, and before I was a principal, I was a high school math teacher. I taught math at Juanita High School for a little over a decade, everything from pre-algebra to calculus, and I helped start the Cambridge program and design that math pathway. So I'm not going to talk about Amplify, since you've heard all about it from our amazing teachers and how it promotes mathematical thinking, because that's really what we want as we get kids up into the upper levels of math. But I want to talk about what teachers need anytime that we go through an adoption. So we're going to talk a little math before we talk about what teachers need. So John Hattie is a very well-respected educational researcher, and he researches practices that have the greatest impact on student learning. So he does meta-analyses. So basically, he'll research a practice, and he'll gather every study that has been done around that practice, and then he does what I would consider statistical magic. So he analyzes statistics all over the place and comes up with an effect size, which is a measure of how effective that practice is in terms of student learning. So according to John Hattie, an effect size of 0, there's not much happening there, right? We really don't want an effect size of 0. He calls an effect size of 0.4 the hinge point. So it's the point where it's about a year's worth of learning, and that's the point, if you studied calculus, is the turning point where you go from some learning to more learning, right? Like it's the edge. So what we want is really all practices to be utilized that have an effect size of 0.4 or higher. So he analyzed 208 studies on professional development for math and science teachers and found an effect size of 0.48, which means that when we invest in professional learning for math and science teachers, we have a greater than average impact on student learning. So, as we think about the implementation of this adoption, we know that Amplify is a really strong curriculum, right? It's super visual, so for learners who need more concrete ways of seeing things, it's going to be great for them. It's going to be great for all kids. But it's not necessarily going to change instruction. We've been talking about math achievement. I've been in education for 20-some years. We've been talking about math achievement the entire time and probably before. We're still trying to figure out how we move kids ahead, right, in math achievement. Instruction is that thing. We have to move instruction ahead. Our last math adoption was about 10 years ago. 2016, 2015-ish. A lot has changed since then. Social media, shorter attention spans, right? Just name a few. We also know a lot more about learning. There's been a lot more research on cognitive science, and Amplify has all of that in there in its curriculum, but it all comes back to instruction. So we know this curriculum is going to support change for student learning, but ultimately instruction is what truly matters. And so in addition to adopting this curriculum, we need to invest in professional development for our math teachers. If we don't, we're not going to see the shifts in student learning that we really want to see. And we also need to support an investment in administrator learning, because we, administrators in the building, need to be there to support teachers as they're making these instructional shifts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. There we go. We got movement here. Our computer doesn't, okay. Our computer's not loving us right now. Let me try one more thing here. There we go. Okay, got it. Thank you. She keeps trying to help me. Okay, so we have our teacher supports, we have our students, and then of course we have caregiver and family supports that go with this. This material comes with a really robust caregiver and family support system that's embedded in it. Each unit comes with a full overview with vocabulary and worked examples, including a little commentary about what the math is and what people might expect from it. It includes suggestions for supporting students. It has scope and sequence, letters that teachers can send home to families that include those links. And it also includes little videos about the math that families can use if they want to at home, or kids could even access if they've been sick and need some support. We are very fortunate to have two community members who've been part of our committee and are here tonight to talk about this process and their own experiences and hopes for this curriculum.
Hello, my name is Vidya Sundaram. I'm a parent of two kids here at Lake Washington School District. One is in 7th grade and the other's in 4th grade, Inglewood Middle and Blackwell Elementary. In addition to being a parent here at Lake Washington, I've spent the last 20 years working in educational research. First 10 years of that was leading research for great schools, and the last 10 years leading my own organization, Family Engagement Lab, studying the impact of family communications about instruction. And so it's been a real pleasure to have this sort of magical timing and opportunity to be involved in the materials selection committee. As it was just shared, I know that these selection processes happen very infrequently in school systems, and so I didn't want to miss an opportunity to volunteer my time for something that actually matters a lot for kids, which is the selection of really good quality, strong materials that are engaging and that can help students access learning in ways that make a difference and set them up for success later in life. So it was something that I was very passionate about. And in particular, I know that we're now in an era where there are a lot of differences in materials, and so it was great to see the committee be so intentional about selection of materials that really engage students in critical thinking in ways that are so fun and engaging. And not only did we see through the process of seeing more than, we read every comment. There were 1,500 student comments, and we were so excited to see each and every one of them. But the most exciting one was, and I never would have expected, starting in 2024, that, the stars would align and that my own daughter in Mr. Nash's class in Inglewood would also be part of the pilot testing process. And I have to say, just seeing her her face when I said, oh, our committee, we're going to put forward a recommendation. She said, please say it was Amplify. So she was very, very excited that we were putting forth Amplify because she found it to be so much more engaging, than the, not just the current option, but the alternative. And it was a really wonderful full circle moment for me to see that the fruits of, what we did in our committee were appreciated by the voices we need to hear from the most. Going, back to the other experiences that I had in the committee that really were meaningful for me and full circle, like tying the research and my work and family engagement, was just seeing how much the committee was engaged in understanding and really experiencing math instruction. I heard Wendy made you all do math lessons, and seeing how that problem solving comes to life. We got to see that and experiencing that as well in the committee. But I want to really make a bridge to how important it is to help families understand that just because this is a different way of teaching math and that there's a low floor for students to access it, it doesn't mean it's less rigorous than the approaches. In fact, it is much more rigorous and more inclusive for students to be able to access math in this way, and they can push each other in the classroom. And there are amazing on-ramps for families to engage in the same practices at home. A family at the dinner table can say, about something that's happening in the world, gas prices. What do you notice about gas prices today? What do you wonder? And things like that that cuts hard. I may be too soon, but these are questions that families are talking about day to day, and it's so important for students to feel a sense, instead of hopelessness or powerlessness in the world that we live in, feel a sense of agency. And I feel really passionate, excited that we're moving towards an instructional model in math that gives kids more agency in the world that they live in.
Hi, I'm Seth LaForge. I have 3 kids at Mann Elementary and RMS and RHS, so I've got the full spectrum going on. And I'm going to start with a point that Dr. Holman already made very eloquently. I'll do my best. I got an email inviting me to this math curriculum thing, and I wanted to support the community, and I used to know some math, so I figured I was qualified. And if you'd asked me before that what I had imagined math curriculum selection to be at a school district, I would have described, a couple of administrators in a smoky room throwing darts at a wall. Just kidding about the smoky part. But, so I was really amazed at the incredible amount of effort and thought and care that went into this process. And there was probably a previous briefing on last year's effort, but it was like 30 people filling this room all day for, 8 days, 7 days. It was a lot of effort. And terms like rubrics sound very dry. I was really impressed. We were encouraged to acknowledge our existing biases and preferences. And, there's real trade-offs involved in how you teach something. And teachers had opinions and parents had opinions. And we brought all of that up and, really hashed it out. So, I guess my point is, if you have any fears that not enough care and effort went into the selection, I would say, if anything, it's the opposite. Maybe it was too much. But given the number of kids and the number of years this is going to impact, I think it's very appropriate. The other point I'd like to make is a little more personal. My 13-year-old son is pulled out of geometry, and I'm teaching him at home with a third-party curriculum for reasons I won't go into. But it's really brought home to me, this curriculum is really dry. It's boring. It's very hard to get him to be interested at all. And the contrast to what we've been seeing with Desmos is really coming home to me. And it kind of doesn't matter how complete your instructional materials are if the kids aren't interested. And just from the comments we've seen, it seems like this will be a huge improvement over what we've had. And I don't know if this is the best possible curriculum, but I am very confident that of the available options, it is the best. Thanks.
Yeah, really appreciate all of you for your time in that. Thank you. So we want to talk about what we hope comes next, which is implementation. What you've heard is some conversations around what should come next, what we hope will come next. We're really excited that the biggest request from this team is, can we please get training this spring? Don't wait till the summer. Don't wait till the fall. So we've been doing some work ahead of time in hopes that this goes through, to say, yes, we're going to have training at least one full day for every single educator that teaches these math classes, which includes our special education co-teachers, multilingual teachers, and our safety net teachers, so that it is across the board. The other thing that we were really excited about was a real request from all of the teachers saying, we want our administrators to know what these shifts are. We really need them alongside us in some of this training. So these are some things we're planning for. And we actually just had a day with the team really thinking about what are our hopes, what are our dreams, what are our needs, so that we can start hashing out those final next steps. But of course, year one is just the first step. We know that year one can be all of the new, and year two is where it gets really, we get to dig in, go the gap analysis. What is missing? What do our teachers need more? What do our administrators need more? So when we make this kind of investment, it's so important that it's not a one and done, that we will continue to work with our students, our teachers, our administrators, and our families and caregivers to really say, how is this working, and what else do we need to do to really support the really in-depth learning for our math students. And finally, we just want to say thank you. Big thank you to our committee members who devoted so much of their time to being a part of this process, to our teachers who spent all of those days away from their students that they care about, to our students who piloted and gave really great feedback, and some of it was really funny and so perfect for a 13-year-old. And then to our board members who spent a lot of time being walking alongside and kind of seeing the work that is being done. So on behalf of our entire team, we are incredibly excited, and we say thank you for supporting us in this work, and we are really excited for the Amplified curriculum. And if you have any questions, we're here.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. Are there any questions from the board? James.
Okay, so speaking from me, I'm super excited about this. When I saw on the agenda, I was like, wow, a new math curriculum, because I remember throughout my whole entire school experience, it's been just the same plain reading through a thick textbook that I don't know how anybody reads the whole thing of, and I had to carry around in my backpack, which now is digital, but it's still like 600 pages long. I did have, like, just my opinion on the curriculum. When you brought up the example of the prescribed triangle, I was like, wow, I remember when I learned that unit, it was really boring, and I don't remember any of it. And I think if I did learn it through visually, it would have been more memorable. But I think when we're doing these shifts, I think it's really scary for a lot of community members, because I think for the past 100 years, it's been taught in this same exact way, and it's worked. It's worked, I think. But when we do this shift, will there be any differences in, like, students going back, even though these textbooks are really long and repetitive? Can these students go back and reference materials? Like, how will we be equipping these students to, like, adapt this new type of learning when they're probably experiencing something else? Not speaking for the next generation. And yeah, that's my main question.
Thank you. And for that, I'm going to invite any of our teachers who have utilized the curriculum to give their, I could answer it, but I would love for you to.
I think that this goes to Nikki's point that this is going to be a training process. we still work in our notebooks in our class, because the word I've heard that I really like is formalize. If something exists online, that's one thing, but we really need to get it in our notebooks, and we really need to write out what it is that we learned specifically, because you can explore, but we all need to come back to the same point at some point. One thing that Amplify does really well is they have lesson summaries. So if a community member or a student wanted to go back and look at a lesson summary that has that sort of written textbook-like block of information that I think you're talking about, there's no sign-in that is needed. It is a big PDF that you could go to right now on your phone, click on it, and anybody could access it. And it's going to require training to teachers to balance that. Well, let's introduce this new idea of exploring and learning from each other and learning at our own pace, and then also pulling back and getting something solid, concrete in your notebooks. There's not really an easy way to do that. It's going to take time.
Just to clarify, James, to clarify your question, were you asking a little bit about like what happens when the lesson's over and I'm a little unsure, or can you just narrow down your question a little bit?
I just remember even like going back through textbooks and opening up to a specific page to find maybe a practice problem, or maybe the explanation that this certain author gave of like what is a derivative. That I think when I'm not familiar with Amplified Decimals math at all, but when I looked online for some of like its like samples or like what it looked like, I didn't really see a page where I could go back and look at the formal definition or the explanation it gave.
Yeah, then what Mr. Willis mentioned is a really good resource. Every lesson, there's a kind of a point in the lesson where you do synthesis and you talk about, what were we really doing today? What is the purpose of it? And when we do that check-in, and then there's practice that would be like your homework or maybe in-class work, depending on how long it is. And when you do that work, part of that includes a page that summarizes the concept really cleanly. And so I think that's what you'd probably be referring to. And I know in the case of my class, I've made little PDF, like printed out packets of those summary pages for students to reference, and then they add some additional notation kind of at their own discretion with some guidance and facilitation by me. And so I think exactly what each teacher will do will vary a little bit, but there's definitely, kind of tools and things in place for us to address what you're talking about pretty well.
Okay, I think I'll have one more question, and then I think Suneri has a couple of questions too. Hopefully it doesn't take that long. My question is, I think when I was going through the curriculum, especially in geometry and algebra, I think I gained a lot of my insight on how it was being taught in my later stages, learning calculus or upper level math, and going back and being like, wow, I did not retain much of this information on geometry or trigonometry. And a lot of it I gained through just a lot of practice problems. And so when we're shifting to this new type, I guess it's not just rigorous, doing so much math. Are we going to be looking at maybe this cohort of students if they retain the information better than what we're switching from, the, I guess, more traditional way of learning? And if we are we going to look back and maybe analyze that data at all?
Yeah, I think repeat what I think I hear you say? Are we going to be paying attention to what shifts we see in student retention, which could show up in test scores and grades, to make sure that this new way is also helping them remember or retain?
I think not just test scores, but maybe asking them in later years if the way they were being taught in geometry, maybe in calculus, do they still use the information they learned in geometry?
Yeah, so part of this process will include continual surveys with students and talking. And some of those metrics we look at are those grades and test scores. Those are solid third points, in addition to the experiences we hear from our kids. We also look at the fact that this is research-based curriculum, that a lot of what you're asking is research that has been done, that has helped to develop this curriculum. Because sort of the converse is, oh boy, when we don't have this problem-based learning, how am I applying that? And am I remembering things that Mr. Willis described from his geometry class, which I don't remember? And how might it be remembered more if it was approached from a problem-based way? So with any kind of implementation, it's so important that we do our due diligence and continue to follow and get that impact and results from our students. And we'll continue to do that. And I think the other important thing, and we've said this a lot during our practice, there is no curriculum that is perfect. If there was, we wouldn't need our teachers, and we know we need our teachers. And even with this phenomenal curriculum, we really have to have that continued practice, that continued reflection, and that's a commitment we make.
Okay, I have a couple questions, so I'm really sorry in advance. It's like a three-part question, and most or almost all of them I think are for the teachers. So I know that we saw like a lot of quotes about how students felt about Amplify Desmos, but I was just wondering like what the primary negative student feedback was surrounding Amplify, and kind of how we're making up for that.
One thing I've heard is, I don't like that Amplify makes me teach myself. I think there is going to be a balance of, you have never learned in an exploratory way where you are leaning on your prior knowledge and you are leaning on your classmates more than you're leaning on your teacher. I think that question of how do we ease our students into that process rather than throwing them in the deep end, especially because Algebra 2 Amplify Desmos does assume that students have been doing Amplify Desmos since 7th grade. So that's going to be a continuing conversation no matter what. What was the second part of your question?
That was just the first one. Okay, I'm just gonna like be candid. I'm kind of asking my questions from the perspective of someone who was a student piloting Amplify English in middle school, so that would have been 5 years ago in 7th grade. And I'm sure Amplify has changed a lot from then, and also the math version is probably different from the English version. But I remember one of my biggest complaints surrounding it, and also a lot of my classmates' biggest complaints, was that it felt too like prescribed almost, or repetitive, where it was kind of this format of you read something and then you answer like short answer questions about it, and then you answer like multiple choice questions about it. And I think I've done problems on Desmos. It wouldn't have been through Amplify, but I believe Desmos also has some sort of like investigations they offer, which is kind of a similar thing where it's like, oh, move this point on the graph and see what it does. Now type in the box like what you notice, and it becomes a bit like fatiguing almost. So from what I can tell, it seems very engaging, Amplify Math, but I was just wondering, like, has this shown up in your classrooms at all, where at the beginning it seems really fun, but then like towards the end of the lesson it gets a bit fatiguing to follow such like a prescribed series of questions?
Yeah, of course.
Even if something's really great in many ways, if you do it over and over again, it gets painful and boring. I mean, that's the bottom line, and you're absolutely right. And so one of the things that's good about the way the curriculum is set up is they actually do recommend a good split between lessons that aren't done digitally and digital lessons. The platform, the way it's set up, is really powerful for the teacher when we're actually managing a lesson. We can show any student's individual work. We can show like all the responses kind of like on the screen at once. So it's got all these great features. So it's a really excellent for that. But if you don't mix it up, if you just opt to go digital day after day after day, you and the students are going to get digital fatigue. So I think that's a really valid part of what we've got to be clear on is, like that unit I did, it was 50-50 recommended by Amplify. And you could even choose on some of the units maybe to do more of the lessons if you're noticing that it's, you know, what you need to do. And that's where the training and the practice with the curriculum is going to come in.
Yeah, I think my experience with Amplify was definitely what you said of digital fatigue, just because I had it during my like online year, COVID year, so that's all I had. Yeah, so.
Sorry about that.
And then I only have one more question. Sorry, I'm almost done. Okay. But just being a student who's done Amplify in middle school in Desmos and then kind of went to high school, and James and I were talking about this while we may not agree with how a lot of the advanced classes are taught in high school, especially AP classes, most of them don't really, like, I would say almost have time for this sort of like investigative learning. They're almost all, at least from my experience, very set up through like teacher lectures or textbooks, and then you kind of have to review it on your own. And I think it's important to just like keep in mind that in elementary school and middle school, like class pace and content and what we choose to cover is much more left up to the discretion of teachers, whereas especially when you get to AP classes, because College Board sets that and it has to be a standardized college credit, teachers just have to cover that amount of content and that same content at the pace we're given, which I think affects like, you know, the way of learning. So while it's really great that middle school students will get this like engaging kind of investigative problem-based way of learning, how do we foresee this affecting like their preparation for the format of high school classes where that's not really going to be happening?
So I'm going to give you an answer that might push thinking a little bit, and that is, I agree with you that the demands of certain courses does change, can change how things are taught. But if we're looking at research around retention and rigorous learning, that I would argue that, and the research would show, that when done with fidelity and integrity, that utilizing this kind of approach with learning is going to provide students with deeper understanding, which will benefit them more when the way that the course is taught changes. As a former middle school principal and educator for years, I kind of balanced elementary folks saying, oh, we've got to prepare them for how it's done at middle school, and the middle school saying, we got to prepare them for high school. And if we use that logic, we've got to prepare them for college. If we back that up, we would just be lecturing to first graders. And we know that that's not what we do, so we don't do that. And I'm incredibly excited for the way that we can really think about what learning can look like differently, and base that in research that shows that, yes, there's deeper retention, and that can then benefit in those more advanced classes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I actually completely agree with you, where I think like understanding the concept, like especially I've noticed, as James said, I think Algebra 2 is super foundational for understanding anything in calculus, and if you don't understand that, or geometry, then you're never going to get that. So yeah, my only thing was maybe like keeping in mind or tracking through like how students felt like shifting to it investigative, or like maybe a form of learning that takes longer but also creates a deeper understanding affected their ability to, you know, be in classes where you're kind of just like cramming information all at once.
Yeah, and I will say this, it was a topic of conversation, a lot of conversations with our teachers, and recognizing that there are going to be gaps that we need to fill, and some of that may be some of the things you're describing.
Thank you. I'm all done now, so somebody else can
Hey,
ask
we really appreciate the questions. Yeah.
Director Yoakum.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very exciting to see the actual snippets from the website and being able to show the turtles racing. That was exciting. I won't tell you the story that I was playing in my head. So my question is, as we move towards more inclusive instruction in our secondary schools, can you speak to how this curriculum is structured to help our ML educators and all of our special educators work with math educators to ensure that every student is accessing this curriculum?
Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Wendy for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I was recently in a class with Peter Liljedahl, the author of Building Thinking Classrooms, talking about that exact same thing, that discourse routines support students who are learning the language in a multitude of ways. When students hear each other, it was fascinating. He talked about when students are talking to each other, they're using gestures. They're pointing at things. They're sitting next to each other and talking. They're also listening to the teacher. There is probably some aspect of, there's a direct instruction aspect to this. The synthesis may include the teacher wrapping up the lesson. So we have this multitude of ways that students are understanding the language. We also know that our multilingual teachers will need to have the training. Nella talked about who would be involved in our implementation training, and they would be fully wrapped up in that training to learn how these materials work and how their students can access and how they can help understand the math themselves. If they're a co-teacher, they need to understand the math and the lesson and what their students need. So these materials, I think you saw on a slide where they show different supports that the teachers have, and then part of that is for multilingual learners as well. So they would show if students aren't quite getting it, what could you do? And in some cases, it's really interesting, the description of if students aren't getting it yet, they say, just hold on another couple lessons because this builds through this unit in this way. So it's an interesting thing that it does in that it both spirals and also provides differentiation for lots of different students, including for extensions, which we know people will need as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for the MLPs, thank you. And
Yeah.
I'm curious about special education. If we look at not just safety net teachers, but also our transition.
Special education
Yeah,
student
special ed.
yeah.
And I know that at secondary, there are different levels that we have with our special ed teachers. So how are they then engaging with our math teachers to ensure that all of students are accessing this in general ed?
Right, so same situation with anyone who's teaching math learners. They would be involved in the training, including all of the instruction training, and they would get to understand the supports that the curriculum itself provides. And like the teachers talked about, each of the lessons provides an on-ramp for students. We heard from hundreds of students about these materials that they were able to, even the ones who had first period math said, which was surprising to us, that, oh yeah, we can get into this because the on-ramp is not so steep that it feels like we're, that this gets difficult too early. So students can access at their own rate, and then they also have their peers to use their discourse routines to build their understanding. Our special education teachers need to know how that works too, so that we're not relying on telling strategies for students who may be able to access higher levels of math than we realize, because we may not have had the strategies that we needed to help them. Thank you.
Dr. Meekhoff.
Thank you all for being here, especially late. This was really informative for me. I just want to say I really appreciate whoever spoke to the misconception that, the low floor doesn't mean less rigorous, and I think I can see that being a challenge with parents as this curriculum comes in, like this is too easy, and so making sure that we're really informing parents. Hypothetically, I think having a low floor for parents to engage is really nice too, so that if you maybe have a teenager who comes to you needing immediate math help and you haven't been in math for a long time, perhaps you can easily access that curriculum. And so I can see it working really well for both students as well as parents who do want to actively engage, but the bar has been really high, So thank you.
Yeah, I shared with Wendy and Seth and I think some other folks at the meeting last week that I've been relearning how to factor polynomials to assist my current Algebra 1 student. And let's say that there's a pretty low bar for family engagement in terms of what an improvement would look like. Did I put that nicely? Yeah, I think so. Honestly, in the current curriculum, it's been very challenging. There haven't been a lot of resources, and I've really had to rely on the teacher. And I'd love to free her up to teach her students, and me be able to self-serve a little bit to assist my student. So my question is one that I warned that I was going to ask, which, Nyla, you mentioned a little bit about the gaps. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, knowing that there is no perfect curriculum? What are some of those gaps that you're seeing, and how might we think about filling those?
Yeah, one of the primary ones that has come up in all of our conversations with the teachers on the team and the input from all of the pilot teachers is the need to also have enough practice for students so that they gain that fluency and flexibility. And those things go hand in hand. And so the questions around, are there other supplementals or resources that we can keep in mind as we're moving through this beginning of implementation, to say, what are we seeing that is needed? What we are not going to do is implement and then say, here you go, that's it. There will be recursive questions and feedback. We don't want to pre-solve a problem until we have seen what it looks like in our classrooms, but we have an awareness that extra practice and just fluency needs is going to be a piece of it. The other barrier that our teachers also brought up a lot is exactly what Director Meekhoff just brought up, is this will likely be a big change for families too. And we all know we went to school, and a lot of us went to school within these systems, and it is one of the few professions where everyone has been through what we then do, and there is kind of that, I didn't learn that way, so I don't know how to help my child learn this way. And that is a lift that we are preparing for. I will say with these materials, the resources are pretty great for parents. And I love that you said that a lot of these lessons look like they do give an easy on-ramp to parents to support. And that is some of the feedback that we've received and that I think will continue. But we need to think about how we work with our principals and our community members to ensure that we are training them as well, because it is a different story that we're kind of writing in math. Did that answer that question for you? Okay.
Yes, it did. And yes, that's essentially where I've ended up with factoring polynomials, is I'm actually using AI to generate practice problems for her, because it's exactly that fluency piece of really reinforcing. So to have that be more readily available, I think would really help. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Any other board questions? James.
I think from my experience, what I've seen is in every math class, there's going to be students that are like very much ahead and like bored of like doing these repetitive things when they understand the content. There's people who are falling behind, and if you teach at the same pace, then you're gonna leave some people bored, and you're gonna leave some people behind, and you're gonna leave one person who's perfectly paced. My question is, does Amplified Desmos solve that issue, or help it?
My answer is no. Because I don't think that a curriculum alone can solve that. Do I believe that supportive teachers, training with teachers, and utilization of these resources can help to make that more smooth? Absolutely. But I don't believe that any curriculum is going to solve for every problem.
But is it adaptive? Like if you have a student that might answer a certain question wrong, or I actually don't understand how Amplified Desmos works, but I think from what I saw, like there's a panel where the teachers could see the proficiency of each student, like this is beginner, this is medium, and then this is advanced. Like these students are all at these categories. Yeah, like.
And I love that I have a teacher tapping me going, I've got this one, so I'm going to bring David up here. I got you.
Yeah, so there's kind of a couple different levels to what you're referring to, James. And I mean, to be blunt, there's students that start Algebra 1 at Timberline every year, and they know the whole course on day one. So that's an entirely different problem. I'm assuming you're talking about someone that's kind of in the lesson and is ready for a greater challenge. So what they have, it's referred to in the curriculum as like, are you ready for more? And you can use those kind of selectively. Plus, you're seeing this like kind of meta view of all the things the student's done if you're doing a digital lesson. And if you're not, you should be implementing one of our protocols to be able to still keep track of what students are doing. And they do have intervention levels. And so for each lesson, there's kind of like a challenge. There's several challenge sheets throughout the unit that you can use at strategic times, as well as like remediation or like extra practice with clarification type things. And so it's really going to be, incumbent on our training that we give all the teachers to really show us how to leverage those things properly. I think if they are, we'll be able to do a pretty good job. Not for the kid that shows up on day one and knows the whole course, though. That's still kind of a bigger question.
Wait, sorry, just to clarify James' question, so when when students are giving like extra supplementals, either challenging them or like for remediation, that's at the behest of the teacher. It's not like Amplify is seeing like, oh, this student is
No, it's not automated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any further questions? If not, I will now entertain a motion to approve the recommendation from the Secondary Math Materials Adoption Committee to adopt the materials that have been approved by the Instructional Materials Committee, Amplify Desmos Math from Amplify.
I guess I am. So moved.
Seconded.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Meekop that the board approve the recommendation. Is there any discussion? I just want to say thank you again to the community members, to the staff who, I was only engaged with this committee a little bit this year, but it was a lot, even the little bit that I did. And knowing that you all were engaged for even another full year, that was really intensive. Thank you for all the thoughtful work that went into bringing this recommendation forward. All right, hearing no further discussion, we will proceed to vote on the motion. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Congratulations. All right, should we take a recess? Quick recess till 9:10? All right, great, thank you. Next item on the agenda is OE11 monitoring. Tonight we're going to monitor OE11 instructional program, which is one of our 14 operational expectation policies. Through these policies, the board establishes its values about how the school district is expected to operate and the expressed conditions that must exist as business is conducted. The monitoring reports contain the superintendent's interpretation of policy language, a review of current conditions, and monitoring data. The monitoring actions make up part of the board's oversight of the organization and assures the board that its operational standards have been met. Following the presentation, the board will have an opportunity for questions and comments. Dr. Holman, will you please present a summary of the monitoring report?
Yes, and so tonight I asked Dr. Rose to dig into OE11 and provide an update for the board, and so she will do that for you. It's also interesting to have an adoption process presented because it's really directly aligned with OE11. So with that, Dr. Rose.
Yes, thank you. I think it's absolutely perfect to have the adoption process overview because it so directly aligns with everything that's in OE11 and thinking about the indicators in OE11. So OE11 is the instructional program, and one of the ways to think about OE11 is thinking about to what you said, Director Guthrie, to thinking about like how are we as a district ensuring that we have a program of instruction in place. So OE11 is really the structures and the systems that put the skeleton around instruction. If you think about like having everything be aligned and everything work in the right way, OE11, especially the first few indicators, are really thinking about how are we as a system ensuring that we are aligning to what's really important. So the program of instruction are all the pieces here, and we'll go through some of the specifics on them. But I wanted to bring out that as we're thinking about OE11 is monitoring for 24-25, and in the year 24-25 was when we really developed our strategic commitments and our strategic framework. So you'll see the work in OE11 is captured in many places, directly aligns to these pieces, and that as a system, we're getting clearer and clearer about how our work in our academic program directly aligns with equitable and just systems and inclusive and rigorous learning. And thinking also about integrated sustainability and operational excellence. The work in OE11 deeply aligns with our values. And when we think about what you just heard in the secondary math adoption, you heard a presentation about a recommendation for instructional materials, but you actually really heard a deep belief in how students learn and a deep belief in the level of achievement that students can have. So when we think about the academic program, there are many of our indicators that are about the structures, that they are somewhat technical, but there's a belief underpinning them that is really important to attend to, as well as the accountability that doesn't show up so much in OE11. The accountability for our academic program shows up more in R2. But I think maybe a year ago when I presented OE11, or when we presented the instructional services, we said OE11 is really the street data that lines up with the satellite data of R2. So we're thinking about all of the different things that go into the outcomes that we want for students. So the first part of OE11 is the technical part, the structures, but these two lines, the superintendent interpretation, get at more than the sum of the parts. That they're really thinking about Director Yoakum has talked several times about, we have these different ways that we measure student learning. How do we really think about what's important for the joy of learning, like the experience that's really the rigorous, relevant learning that goes beyond thinking about standards are incredibly important, but how are we tying those to learning experiences that are deeply impactful and meaningful for our students? So those are where the interpretation really comes in, and thinking about how do the strategies and structures help us get to the guaranteed and viable of our program, but really think about, like the teachers were just talking about, the mindsets that we want for our students, like the perseverance that it takes to have to be your own teacher some of the time, and the adaptability to know that you're working with your peers on deepening the learning, and how important that is. So I wasn't going to be part of the earlier presentation, but in many conversations with department chairs at college, with people who are professionals in the field, the ability to apply learning outside of the place that you learned it, to James's point of how do I remember why I learned what I learned and how I apply it, is incredibly important. So when we think about the overall academic program, then absolutely we are also thinking about the mindsets, which are harder to quantify but incredibly important. And one of the reasons why you have so many pages around professional learning in OE11 is really thinking about that development of mindsets, not only of our students, but of our teachers. So when you're looking at OE11, I'll talk about each indicator separately, but I wanted to bring in a couple of visuals just to kind of bring the frame for as we think about OE11, that students are absolutely at the center of it, and that we think about with any of our professional learning, with any of the systems that we talk about in there, we go out from that to think about our teachers and our school staff and our building leaders and our system leaders to think about how all those pieces nest. And there's some specific examples I can give later, but when we think about our LEAP learning, so the required learning that we have for all of our teachers, is focused directly on how does that learning improve the experience of students? How does it deepen their learning, deepen their achievement? So if we go up from that, what we want for students, we design professional learning for teachers that we require all teachers to engage in. And a lot of that has to do with their PLC, so creating their own learning. And that learning happens at the school and the staff level with our teachers. Building leaders are engaged in that same learning, like frequently it's that same learning but deeper so that they're able to lead for it. And then that learning tracks back up to our system leaders. So we've got a direct through line. Even though you've got many separate bullet points in OE11, you have that through line of thinking about how do we center in on students and build the system around it. So I just included as one of the ways that we think about it is thinking about a strategy map, which is just a logic model. So again, if we start at the bottom and think about what do we want for students, what does that mean that teachers need to do? And if there are certain things that teachers need to do, what do they need to learn? If teachers need to learn a specific thing, what do coaches or teacher leaders or administrators need to do? And then in order to do that, what do they need to learn? So again, you'll see many separate pieces of evidence in OE11, but they track back to thinking about what is that vision for student learning and how does each piece of the professional learning and each piece of the system that we have here line up with that, all the way from the central office down to what happens in the classroom every day. So that's kind of the set in thinking about many of the indicators. You'll see some crossover evidence. I tried really hard to keep evidence in its own indicator, but that's not really the way it lines up. So you'll see some of that crossover. But the first one is, you heard a lot of it today in the math adoption. So 11.1, assure that instructional programs are based on comprehensive and objective review of effective practices and research. This indicator is most visible at the beginning of an adoption. So this is kind of the first stage that Director Guthrie's been part of, and I know Director Yoakum's been part of, that the first stage in an adoption is deep learning around the standards, deep learning around the practices. We use our own rubrics that we tie to the state standards as well, and we use the OSPI rubrics. We use external review sites such as EdReports, and we think about the different amount of time for any of programs, anything that we adopt, how large is the adoption and what length of time do we need to engage in learning. So math had a full year of learning. K-5 literacy has had 2 full years of learning before they led up into this year of engaging the actual processes of adoption. So in 24-25, we consistently use our process and our procedure, and that's really a way that we're quality controlling to make sure that we're thoughtful and attentive to all the different pieces in a system and all the different pieces of research when we move forward. So this is part of probably the bones of the skeleton, some of the bones of the skeleton that are attending to the process. 11.2, base instruction on district and academic standards that meet or exceed state or national standards. So standards are what we teach. So it's an interesting dynamic in thinking about, you just heard about adopting secondary math instructional resources that will help us teach standards. So I will hope that we will never say, what do you teach in 7th grade math? Oh, I teach Amplify. No, we teach the standards that align with 7th grade math. And Amplify is one of the tools that we use with that. So one note about Amplify, just a side note from earlier, Amplify as a curriculum company is actually really known for providing a solid base, like a really terrific delivery mechanism base. And they, instead of having like a suite of math teachers or a suite of teachers that write their curriculum, they actually go find where the best curriculum is and then they locate it on their base. So it's something that actually makes them be very strong. They are a provider for K-5 science as well as ELA in middle school. And yes, any curriculum has flaws, so I get what the students were saying about that. But standards are what we teach, and instructional resources are a way to do that. So anytime that we're looking at any program, we're really clear about the standards, because every single program is going to have a big flashy, awesome, will solve all your problems stamped on the front of it, and we're deeply thoughtful about what is it actually asking of our students. So in 24-25, we had quite a few. We had the secondary math, we had some AP adoptions, we had K-5 ELA, and we are continuing to align with the standards. Something that's going to be interesting, it was last week that OSPI released their mostly final draft of the ELA standards. We're talking in cabinet only 18 months or so late. But I say that, I actually was at a workshop last week at Puget Sound ESD, and someone described it as a positive wrapped in an opportunity, that the new standards actually look like they'll be significantly more aligned with what we want for instruction and less redundant and repetitive. But it's a major shift, and as Barbara shared earlier, it's an unfunded one. It's a significant change that we're looking at how we implement. And kind of lucky for us, we're in adoption years with some significant time, so it'll help us with that. So 11.3, if you think about, like, if 11.1 was the start of adoption, 11.2 was midway through the adoption, thinking about standards. 11.3 is the day-to-day work. So 11.3 is the more active component. It's how the resources and instruction show up in schools. It's much of this is teacher-driven work, so it's not like it's in theory. This is really where we're having our teachers, our work groups, or our specialists really dig in and think about what are all of the different places that we need to look at our system to make sure we're genuinely aligned. So in 24-25, we did a ton of work. There are highlights. I'm just hitting a few highlights in the actual discussion, but there are many in the actual report. But middle school science, the alignment, the standards alignment shifted us to using OpenSciEd as opposed to the textbooks I think our students would have comments about. We started to really engage in significant content area collaboration at the secondary level, and we started to really do that as a consistent process. So working with department chairs on a regular basis to do that kind of alignment across systems. And then pulled in some reviews of advanced placement, college and the high school, and Running Start. One of the significant places that we did teacher professional learning that I think will show, like, it was an undercurrent that didn't really come out in the earlier presentation, but there had been this kind of odd thing with our Algebra 1 teachers, that it was taught one way at middle school and a different way at high school. And so in the 24-25 year, we brought that team that you just saw brought teachers together to align, like, what actually should instruction in Algebra 1 look like, and make sure that we were on the same page across school levels to really think about how are we ensuring curriculum and instructional strategies are aligned with the standards. So the indicators for this one are fairly technical, but we included lots of evidence of the kinds of work that's more of the day-to-day, how are we ensuring that we're aligning with the standards. 11.4 is one of our technical ones, and the indicators are really thinking about, are we communicating about our assessments and using them? Are we providing updated guidance for teachers and in terms of assessments? And are we thinking about all of the resources, the professional learning that teachers have for assessment? And those pieces are all in place. The indicator, the technical indicator pieces are all in place. There's so much more in terms of thinking about how assessment shows up in our district, in terms of thinking about use of universal design for learning, or at the high school level, really thinking about, continuing to think about equitable assessing practices, grading and assessing practices. So for 11.5, so I think as we're thinking about, like, if we're moving from the skeleton and the bones and some of the structures, this is where we're really getting into the muscle, and we're getting into the ways that things look like the same and really different and exciting in terms of how we build the whole body of the academic program. And I'm kind of making up this analogy as I go. So, so the technical pieces in here are that master schedules are based on student request. Absolutely. They have been for years and years, and they absolutely have been. There are so many options that our students have at the secondary level. And what's exciting about that, and it ties also to 11.7, is that they're not only aligned with student interest, they're aligned with student opportunity. So some of the work that happened in 24-25, and again, this is spilling over into 11.7, is the new graduation pathways that we started really putting together. So it wasn't like a great CTE class, but a great sequence of CTE classes that met the graduation pathway and helped a student take a series of courses that would help them understand and build towards what are their post-secondary options that they want. So we had just a tremendous amount of seats. So we had, it's not 12,871 students, but students were taking more than one CTE class. And we built additional partnerships. So there are some exciting ones where we deepened our partnership with WABS, Washington Alliance for Better Schools. Honeywell was one that we developed in 24-25 and implemented this year. That's a really exciting, straight up partnership with someone in the community. We have continued to 24-25. We had extensive offerings in the arts, and that work that we did last year meant that we continued that. As we moved from a 7-period day to a 6-period day, we really worked on how are we ensuring that students have their choice, lining up last year for this year, making sure that students had choices. So I just included some different pictures. We do actually have a skeleton in the background there. But just all the different things that kids can do that are really, they can really think about their interest and their talents, and they can do it through many different opportunities in the courses that we offer. So 11.5 is within the instructional program, but there are many things that go to outside of the instructional program. But I wanted to highlight first just some secondary opportunities where students across the district can engage in really cool learning, and at elementary as well. So really thinking about how, especially and this will cross over a little bit into 11.7, particularly our social studies curriculum and our science curriculum and opportunities to engage in computer science really give students at the elementary level, that's not any of the indicators there, but the opportunity to engage in some great learning. So 11.6 is the one that has just many, 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 many pieces of evidence. And I promise you it's not trying to have the kitchen sink, to bring in another metaphor, but really to show the depth and the breadth and the flexibility of the professional learning and the resources that are in our system. So the indicators are actually, the evidence is organized around the indicators that you have there. So the first indicator is let me go to the right one, is a multi-tiered system of supports, and then it goes to instructional strategies and resources, and then professional learning and dual language programs. So all of those indicators are actually organized in that order to think about how are we solidifying Tier 1 instruction? What are all the different ways that we are providing different lenses on the types of instruction that's really important for our students? And I think you heard that description in the presentation. The change since 2019 I'll just be specific, the change in 2019 to, I'll come back to that, in the way that our secondary math teachers think about math is profound. A math teacher said to me several years ago when we first started changing the pathways and we're providing resources that aligned with that and providing professional learning that went with that, said to me, I'm just not interested. I really just want a curriculum where I can turn the page and know what I'm supposed to do. And that was a pretty common frame, and not from anything other than, I think someone said 100, maybe it was James, 100 years of learning the same way. We turn the page and we know what we're supposed to do. And we as a system have deeply recognized that is not the way our students learn, and that is not the way that feels good to teach either. That in COVID, when teachers said they were really burned out, when educators said that some of that went back to because I don't feel effective. And the more that teachers feel effective, the more job satisfaction we have. So our professional learning has a whole bunch of different ways that we think about what are the delivery mechanisms. So in 11.6, There are a whole bunch of things that are required learning and opt-in learning, and you'll note themes in there. So you'll note, you'll see at elementary, there are a whole bunch of things around math, and I'll trace that back to thinking about when we started the K-5 math adoption. When we actually did the adoption, it was 2020, and because it was 2020, we weren't able to provide any real professional learning as part of that adoption. So we played catch-up for a couple years in thinking about how we did implementation. And then as that got deeper, we focused all of our LEAP time in 2021, 22 for elementary on math. And then same thing in 22, 23, but on a second year of implementation. And then we started weaving in all the book studies that you see continued in here. Like hundreds and hundreds of elementary teachers have gone through book studies on the same 3 math books because they're so powerful. And you'll also see in here, this is year 3 really of trying out some work with building thinking classrooms. Last year was our first year of like a lot of people trying it out. This year even more, where we also have 2 district building thinking classroom trainers in our district. So that's pretty powerful. So that work at elementary has been powerful in math. It's also been powerful in literacy. So we had a study session less than a month ago on K-5 literacy. That learning for literacy has been going on for about 5 years. And you'll see in here many, many indicators of like bringing in the writing revolution and providing training around integrating writing and science with literacy. So there's a lot of those pieces where we're thinking about what are the different levels, what are the different needs of our teachers, and what are the different ways that we're supporting them where they are in line with our strategic framework and with our KPIs. Secondary, I was going to talk about math. You've already heard about math. I will say that you'll see a lot of indicators in here also about science. We've been doing that sort of like groundswell of change in middle school science and thinking about how do we really think about the professional learning and the resources that support standards-aligned instruction that is relevant and important for our students. I'm going to do a little side note here. Because it highlights, I think, a different way of thinking about teaching. So it's not turning page kind of teaching. This is a quote that I came across in 2021 that I've just been thinking about a lot since then. So thinking about what you heard about where's that low floor and that high ceiling. So in a typical model, so thinking about scaffolding, that the real purpose of scaffolding is to put the person right where they need to be to work at the level that they need to be working at. And what we've typically done in scaffolding is we think of it as a stair step, that we go from one step to the next step to the next step, and you can't go up a step until you've completed the step before. And I have a visceral memory of this where I taught next to a teacher way back when I was an English teacher who did not let their students, and I think I've shared this with the board before, they did not let their students read any poetry, any literature, anything until they mastered the rules of punctuation and sentence diagramming. So guess what the failure rate was in that class? So, yeah. So that was a while ago, but I put this in because I feel like our system has really moved to thinking in this way. And to the questions earlier about the curriculum, like will it make sure every student is at grade level immediately? Will it make sure every student is challenged every day? No. Will it help us get better at it? Absolutely. And along with that, all of the thinking and all of the professional learning that is at thinking around helping our students get have access to challenging, rigorous learning. So some of the system highlights I wanted to put in because there's just so many great things. So we've got incredible teachers. There's Kay teaching Japanese up in the corner, Teacher of the Year in World Language, who runs all kinds of professional learning for our teachers as well as being a fantastic classroom teacher. We have our programs like our national board programs where we have more teachers going through really rigorous learning to be able to focus on student outcomes. We have teachers that work across the district. In the middle picture, we've had teachers come together from different schools to do learning and be able to cross-pollinate. We have our LEAP, which is our lower left corner, where our teachers are really engaged in learning that's focused in that concentric circle way. And then we have upper right hand. We have our leaders doing a lot of that same learning so that we are all learning and focused together and focused on not just learning, but learning to a point, like learning to change. That alignment with our strategic framework is really important as we think of, we can have great professional learning, but if it doesn't change things for students, then what was the point of that? So 11.7, this is another exciting one. This is one that brings really like a lot of color and excitement and thinking to the future for our students, and having students think about the opportunities and experience to actively explore options and graduation pathways. So the indicators for this one are very technical, that they are students complete the high school and beyond plan. So that's something that we did, like students all had the opportunity to do that. There are a couple things I wanted to highlight that went beyond. There's a ton of evidence in there for ways that students were able to have those kinds of experiences. A couple things I wanted to call out were the changes that we made in 24-25 that were, one way to say it is driven by the change to the high school day, but I think it was more that it gave us the opportunity to really look at what we were doing and think if there are ways to innovate and expand options for students. So we did a ton of change to policy and procedure that expanded opportunity for students. Students did a ton of great things to engage in that extended learning. The report that is linked in 11 highlights like literally the thousands of opportunities that kids had for extracurricular, for experiential learning. So there's many pieces of evidence for that one. And again, you can see some of the great things that kids were able to do in terms of the experiences that expanded what they were thinking about. This also had just some great opportunities kids had. There were so many pictures of kids being so proud of the work that they were doing and the opportunities that they had to do learning outside of the classroom and compete. Director Richter and I were at the Wannock Open House last week, which was really kind of fun to see those kinds of opportunities, and mostly to hear students, because the way that they ran the open house was students were out in the hallways and talking about their HOSA, their student organization, and all the different things that they could do as part of that learning, which is reflected in many of our classes as well. That one was really fun because I asked every student I talked to, I said, ignore the content. What are you learning in this class that you think is really important or really impactful to you? And the things that the students said were just great. I mean, there were so many things about, I'm learning how to work with others. I'm learning, one student said, I'm learning I really don't like nursing. And she was right next to her teacher. They were like, yep, that is great to know. You really love so much about the class, but you know you don't want to go into healthcare. So it was a great discussion. So our students have many, many opportunities that are part of that, and they just compete in some wonderful experiences that we know lead to really strong social-emotional learning and development of their own identity. So that's what was pretty exciting. So 11.8, the indicators for this were changed this year, and we kept generally the evidence the same because or the way that we're capturing evidence, because there are so many things that were happening. So the way that we looked at the evidence, and it's in the report, I think there were over, we really were thinking about with this indicator, so what are the ways, like why would we innovate and how would we reflect to the board that we're innovating? And we were really thinking about the updates that we gave to the board, were thinking about innovation to a purpose. Like all of the updates, all the board briefs that we gave, that we provided, all the study sessions, we're really thinking about how are we taking the thinking that we're doing, and it actually goes to the next indicator of regularly reviewed programs, how are we thinking about this in thoughtful ways and extending effective practice, innovating on what we've done before, trying to do things differently. And again, I'll call it the secondary math adoption, just to say like that's a lot of what we've been thinking about, is how to, even like in adoption, we've done adoption processes forever. This one will result in something really different for kids. So innovation to a purpose with connections to 11.6 and some of the other indicators. So we had frequent updates on key elements of the instructional program, and also some thinking about managing the pace of change in terms of like all of the different things that are happening out there. Innovation needs to be for a purpose, and thinking how we are innovating, building towards consistency also in our strategic framework. And again, there's so many different things. I think some of the like fun things that I was reflecting on were at the beginning of the year, thinking about all the teachers that we had engaging in the Open SciEd training. That was just really fun to see. And then different schools coming together to do shared learning. Then 11.9, the indicators are fairly technical that we regularly evaluate and modify all instructional programs and practices. We had multiple formal program evaluations, and we consistently gather data about both the formal and informal. So every single time, I think you actually got a board brief about this last week. Every time we do professional learning with all of our teachers for LEAP, we send out a survey. And we get that data back, and we message it out to the rest of our instructional group, and we bring it to our strategic planning representative group and learn from it for what we need to do differently over time and really gather some additional learning from our teachers. We also do a program survey at the end of the year, and that asks broader questions around how is the pace of change, what do teachers need to learn, what are the different ways that we're able to understand the needs of teachers, and be able to look at that in alignment with how our students doing overall and be able to focus our resources. So, and then we have the Panorama survey that is, I believe right now is, it's open. So we'll evaluate those resources. And we continually utilize stakeholder feedback for our committee work as well. All of that is thinking about our MTSS system and thinking about, as we're evaluating and modifying instructional programs, we are thinking about how we are aligning around having a really strong multi-tiered systems of support with a solid tier 1 and all the different pieces that go along with that. And that we're continually thinking about systemic evaluation for all of the different pieces that we do. One of the things just to call out with that is that all of the different things, so I think about like all of the board briefs that we provided, or all of the different pieces of evidence that are in here, that we're continually trying to think about how are we managing complex change. And I know that the board will often hear this piece isn't changing fast enough, or that changed too much, or in 24-25 we had really significant change. We changed the elementary music program. We changed the K-5 highly capable program. We instituted 4 or 5 classrooms. We went from a 7-period day to a 6-period day. So a lot of that is thinking about how do we do all these massive changes and have people focused on how are we ensuring that we have a solid academic program and developing efficacy in all of us. So that's something that we're always thinking about, and recognizing that anytime there is something that's not success, it's an opportunity for us to really think about what piece in our program is missing and how do we move forward in a way that helps us all be successful. So 11.10, this one is usually a very much like, yep, we kept our schedule and we just made sure we protected the instructional time. Last year actually had quite a bit of work around that in terms of thinking about the high school schedule and really thinking about the goals that we had for the high school schedule in changing the realities of moving from a 7-period day to a 6-period day. So we had significant adjustments for this year, and when we talk about 11.10 next year, we will be talking again about how are we thinking about responding to our stakeholders and really thinking about how we fulfill all of our legal responsibilities, provide a solid academic program, instructional program, and meet all the different needs. So we've had a really intentional focus in 24-25 on schedules that support student learning and well-being, and we're continuing to think about that. So with that, I am presenting OE11 as in compliance, and am open for any questions or discussion.
Any questions? I had one. So a lot of, especially 11.1, focuses on sort of the process for our big curriculum adoption, so like math that we just heard. But more and more there are resources that are coming in mid-cycle, I guess. So you mentioned OpenSciEd, for example, UFly for elementary literacy. There's a number of examples of that. And you just heard me asking the team here about what are the gaps and what might we need to fill. Are we going through the same rigorous process for those midstream, smaller adoptions as we are for the big ones to assure that they're in alignment with the values that are expressed in OE11?
We're not doing quite the same size, but we're doing that, we are doing we're looking at research, we're pulling in stakeholders, we're doing kind of mini cycles, the wrong way to say it. What happens in our adoption cycle, and you've actually named something that's really different from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So in thinking about like the last time let's see, what curriculum I pick on. I'll pick on high school science because that's teeing up. We did an adoption in 2016 for high school science, maybe 2015 for middle school science, so right in there. We bought textbooks for those times. It was right when standards were changing, and so the textbooks had a big stamp on them that said standards aligned. No, they were not. And we as a system really did our best to do, like, brought teachers together and thought about the learning that we would do with them. But we really realized as we got teachers really looking at NGSS, recognizing that we needed to do something more immediate before we got to the timing of the cycle for the money and the ability to do an adoption. And we'd also had a model where we used to do middle school and then high school, so we separated it. And about 7 or 8 years ago, we stopped doing that because we really wanted the whole program. So we wanted the vertical alignment of middle school and high school together. So when we were looking at resources that we needed for middle school, we actually did kind of a sort of a mini pilot and a ton of learning, and we partnered with OSPI for that one because the Open SciEd resources are sponsored by OSPI, and did partnership with different districts, and sent teachers, groups of teachers, like I think at least one from every middle school to learning, to come back and go like, is this a way that we want to go, that we're sort of midstream in an adoption cycle. So that was something that we did where we recognized we have a need and it's going to be some years before we're able to get to the adoption cycle. The other piece that we're looking at, like just thinking about adoptions overall, is that you heard tonight that we're adopting, that we're like Amplify Desmos is pretty much entirely digital. What that would mean is that previously we'd adopt a textbook and we'd buy a textbook for every student, and we could have an adoption be 8, 10, 12, 14 years because we had a textbook that we would refer back to. We're in a really different situation now because in 8 years we'll have to look at a different resource, or we'll have to look at re-upping in that. So that changes how we look at curriculum, and I think it's appropriate because things change a lot. Like James was saying, things change a lot in years. So how are we really able to hold curriculum providers accountable for what do our students need? So that wasn't really a direct, clear answer. So we look at we're continually looking at sort of mini cycles of what does our system need and when can we provide it to them most effectively, and run sort of mini adoption cycles or mini implementation cycles.
If there's no other questions, where are we? We need to, yes. Do I have a motion? No. I will now entertain a motion to approve OE 11 as in compliance.
So moved.
Seconded.
It has been moved by Director Yocum and seconded by Director Meekhoff to approve OE 11 as in compliance. Is there any discussion? Director Yocum.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure if this was more of a question or a discussion. So, yeah, you might need to stand back up. Okay, so OE 11 clearly governs the instructional program that supports our academic outcomes in R3, or R2, sorry. But when I look at R3, which measures SEL outcomes, I don't see a direct operational expectation that governs the instructional practices influencing those SEL results. And I know that OE 10 and OE 14 and everything else really touches on important pieces, but they don't really address that SEL instruction itself. So during a recent board visit, which I'll talk about later, we saw an elementary school using zones of regulation for their SEL instruction. And it made me wonder what the district-wide expectation is for SEL instruction. Is this work captured in an existing OE, or is it missing as part of instructional practices from this one?
So our school counselors generally are, I would say, leading the effort related to curriculum that is specific to social emotional learning. What we also know is that if the only time students receive SEL instruction is from a counselor, that would be disconnected from kind of their day-to-day in real life. We don't call out specific instructional pedagogy related to social emotional learning. There are the Washington State SEL benchmarks, which really R3 is grounded in. The academic program typically has been around academic content knowledge and skills, as opposed to, I'll just say, life skills, which is what in global citizenship, which is what the board has titled Results 3. So I would say it's not in the OEs, but it's not that it's absent from the board's policies.
I guess, I don't know, maybe they are questions. Do we feel that those skills do need to be taught? Not necessarily by a counselor or curriculum, but similar to what you said at the beginning, the ability to apply learning to outside of where you learned is incredibly important. And I think a lot of that is like time management, right? It's that belief in yourself. It is, how is that being taught? If we're measuring that, how are students learning that?
So student profile right there. Yeah, it's not called out specifically in an OE, but it is one of those, like, thinking about the skills of the student profile. So like they were talking about student discourse being really important in math. So through student discourse, and they were talking about like the turtle race, and like students being able to be excited about their learning and talk to each other and share their learning. So it's not an SEL benchmark skill, but as we think about like the skills that are called out on the student profile, like collaboration and critical thinking, those are things that are durable skills that, I don't know, I think there's a really good argument that teaching an SEL lesson definitely has its place and its importance to the benchmark, but thinking about the durable skills and where those might show up aren't called out as specifically yet in an OE, but I think are part of the academic program.
And for the board, I am constantly thinking of this because I think it's that part of the whole child, right? That it's sort of, we leave it up to our staff and our educators to help instruct. It's almost view it like the parenting part, right? Like that's what, as a parent, I try to do with my children, or teach them these skills, and I'm not up to par on the academics necessarily. But I just wonder if it's something to think about, especially with the new profile, like going forward for longer term conversations, just to keep that in the back of our mind of like those skills you talk about, like how are those specifically showing up in expectations that end up in results? Nothing for now, but just more long-term thinking.
Can I share? I just was at a conference where there was a woman who was talking about, she does career-connected learning in Boston, and she was talking about relevant learning. And what she said really stuck with me, because she was talking about how we sometimes get really twisted around with making learning relevant, like we have to figure out, like, does it talk about video games, and that makes it relevant? But she was talking about like kind of the student profile thing of if we actually were able to say something like, communication is a really important skill, and it is connected to SEL outcomes. So let's talk about communication. If we break that down to say, okay, so if communication is part of our student profile, well, active listening is a really important part of communication, so we can break it down to active listening. Well, part of active listening that's really important is paraphrasing. So can we be really clear in our 9th grade English class that paraphrasing is part of the durable skill of communication, and it's really important and relevant because you need to be able to communicate well. So that's work that we haven't drawn that line. I think it happens in classrooms a lot, but that line from our student profile to what are the ways that it shows up in classrooms, I think is the next step.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting, Director Yoakum, on something that I was feeling reading through OE 11, which was no doubt that there's a lot of amazing work going on in the district, and that you didn't get all the way out to like the skin layer, but that it goes there, right? Or the vestibular system, right? We didn't get quite there, which is great. And is it right for the board to be just at the bone level? In many ways, I feel like all of this great work that's happening in the district is in spite of a lack of guidance from the board on what our values are, rather than because we're being clear about our values and then there's alignment throughout the system. So one thing I was noting down or have been reflecting on that was a little bit in the write-up of OE11, but actually doesn't appear in the board's policy language is sort of the concept of like instructional coherence, like knowing that everything we're doing is landing on a student. We probably don't want to have like the best math curriculum and the best science curriculum and the best English curriculum. It may be better for that student if it's curricula all works together and is coherent and teachers are consistent in their strategies across classrooms and so on. And I know that there's a ton of work going on. We were just in a classroom visits last week where a teacher was absolutely masterfully integrating writing instruction with the social studies curriculum, to the point where I walked out of the classroom and I had to ask the principal, now that was social studies class, right? Like that was not writing, but it was content and it was the skills and it was all just really masterfully woven together, and those students were so engaged and so impressive. And that's what I value. That's one of my values. That's the experience I want all of our students to be having. And I don't feel that that's reflected right now in the policy language. Same with social emotional. Yes, I'm not necessarily interested in, do we have a formal SEL curriculum across the district, but it's more that are teachers really purposeful about integrating these skills into the various aspects of student life and experience and so on, so that they're achieving those results policies. So I don't know if that is an update that we need to make, and it really, to be clear, and that's why I'm bringing it up in the discussion, it's not any reflection on the monitoring report whatsoever, which is great. Thank you for going way further than we specified, beyond compliance. But yeah, this feeling that for something that's so central to everything that we do here, the instructional program, it seems like we, the five of us up here, could be a little bit clearer about what we're looking for. And I'll throw out as long as I'm talking and nobody's cutting me off. The other thing is this is sort of self-evident, but we talk about basing our instructional program on standards, which we should, on research, which we should, but there's no actual explicit connection to the board's results policies. That might be implied, but making that explicit, because when we're talking about some of these tools, our district is unique and our results are unique, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in not so good ways, but thinking about a math curriculum adoption and thinking that math, what our secondary students are able to do in math is going to be different from pick another district. That doesn't mean, okay, we're just gonna, be super accelerated and leave kids behind, but recognizing those contours, much as James was pointing out, and the teacher was here too, saying, you've got some kids who are walking in to the first day of Algebra 1 and they already know the whole course. And I was actually talking with that teacher too about that he also gets kids that don't know what 6 times 7 is. And how do you, how do we accommodate the unique mix of skills that we've got here in this district, because these are the students that we're concerned about and that we want to see succeeding. I don't know if there's any thoughts on that, because it could be leading towards a policy revision, or it could just be, Lisa, it's 10:02, stop talking. Director Yoakum. Director Meekhoff.
I'm just looking for some clarity. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, wanting to be more explicit in OE11, tying to our results. Okay. Yeah, I can see where that would be a good idea.
And Director Yocum, are you looking for feedback on also potentially something around SEL? And this can be for board, it can also be for Dr. Holman or staff.
I think you kind of, you really hit it with what you said. And no, I'm going to leave it at that. I appreciate what you said. I feel like Director Liberty is thinking on exactly what to say, so I was just trying to give him a little bit more time.
I agree with your statement of like the board's result, like the instructional program should somehow, how we monitor should be tied to results. We have in OE11, like the preamble does talk about having a program of instruction, relevant opportunities that chief levels define the board's results. But it's not a sub policy, so we never because of that, it's interpreted, there's interpretation, but it's not really monitored. We have that sort of in many policies where we have this sort of preamble where it's almost like, is this part of the policy operationally or not? And that seems to be the case here. Making that its own bullet point could be of something that is then monitored, and there's evidence of compliance of how the instructional program is. But also that is sort of, I was kind of, so now I'm wondering aloud here about whether this is a good idea. Because, that is what the results monitoring, that the theory of action is we monitor results 2, results 3, and then the results themselves are the evidence that we're achieving it. What would I wish you hadn't raised this at 9:58 p.m. because my brain's just not sharp right now, but I'm now even wondering what would the monitoring look like see results 2, see results 3, just sort of a flag pointing to it. It's an interesting. I understand the value. I wonder whether that would fit into our how we the job of the board of monitor the governance role we sit in and actually doing something that shifts the system. So maybe, and I want to think about it more.
Yeah, that's fine. And maybe some of this is just, we can bring this back. We'll have board summary discussion at some point, which will give everybody a little bit more time to think about that. I will say one thing that I thought about in terms of what evidence would look like. I don't think it would actually be the results. So thinking about, for example, the conversation or the math curriculum adoption that just finished, right? So we will monitor this in OE11 next year. It could look something like the committee, evaluated results to monitoring data or something like that. It wouldn't be the actual results because you're right, that's results to monitoring. But also knowing that we aren't really going to see the results, the results showing up in results monitoring for a couple more years. As we work through the implementation, we heard what a lift it's going to be and so on. So seeking evidence of more from a procedure or technical perspective, which is a lot of what OE11 is right now, but just driving that greater alignment. Maybe I will have just thrown that out there and say, yes, maybe something to think about and circle back at board summary time to consider. Because I'm also happy to be told, and that's by anybody, that this is not necessary. Because there is, again, so much great work happening in spite of this guidance, or lack of guidance.
I don't know if I throw this out here, and I don't know how this is going to come out. Dr. Holman said something in the study session about the sustainability plan and how it was this deviation from coherent governance, and we aspire to more than just basic compliance. And I'm wondering now if not that the sub-policies are just written compliance, but is it more of that, the indicators are these compliance-based, but what you're presenting is so much more than compliance? Is that, I don't know, I have to go back and look, but that's kind of just what Dr. Holman said was in my mind, thinking about that in relation to a lot of our policies, and I think a lot of them are just compliance-based, and is that what we want this one to be, right? Is that what, I guess that's kind of what I struggle with. And I know we've had conversations about this before. But I will personally be thinking on this and come back with more coherent thoughts.
Very fair. Are we ready to proceed to accepting this monitoring report? All right. So we are voting to accept the monitoring report for OE11 as in compliance. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, hearing none, motion carries. The board commends the superintendent and his team on the work being done to ensure that we can monitor this policy, and appreciate the efforts being made to gather data that demonstrates this work, and then some. The board summary for OE11 will be drafted jointly by Director Richter and me, and is expected to return to the board for approval at the April 6th, 2026, or a later meeting. All right, next item on the agenda. Tonight we will discuss the WASDA position proposals to have our voice and input as part of the overall legislative positions that WASDA votes on annually. There are a number of areas that we have discussed developing proposals and/or collaborating with other boards related to specific positions. Director Yoakum, would you like to chat about this?
Sure. I kind of had something written up, just like an overview. I will try and read quickly. I can email it if that will be helpful later on. So before every legislative session, WASDA members set the advocacy platform for the year, and that platform is built from the positions that school boards across the state vote on. And there are two kinds of positions with WASDA. One is the permanent positions, and these really reflect the association's core beliefs and values. And then there are the legislative positions, which guide the work the WASDA staff does with our lawmakers. So every year these positions get updated so the platform stays relevant, and with more than 200 positions, the review process starts right now, even though we just wrapped up this year's legislative session. So this is kind of how it works. This is right now is step one. Boards look through the current positions, all 200, I'm sure you all did, and can propose amendments or introduce new ones. And then so we would submit those if we have any at the end of April. And then May through July, WASDA committees review all those proposals and refine the language. And then in August, boards look at the committee recommendations and offer any final amendments and decide how their legislative representative for the board will vote at General Assembly. And in September, leg reps meet at General Assembly and vote on all new and updated positions, and that's when WASDA finalizes the advocacy platform for the upcoming year. So tonight, we're focusing on step one. We're going to talk through possible proposals that President Guthrie sent over that we might want to bring forward. Few ideas to get us started, but if anyone has any other ones they want to address, this is a great time to do that. The goal tonight, quickly, is to leave with a plan for who will work on which proposals so we can bring them back to the full board for approval on April 27th, and if anyone wants to have any discussions about said proposals. The proposals on the table, first one was climate change education and sustainability. And this is a position that we brought forward last year that did not pass. And we received helpful feedback and plan to draft updated language. I know Vice President Liberty is working on this. And I believe Dr. Rose will come in hopefully at the end and assist with any language. Okay, is there anyone does that sound good to everyone? Yeah. Yes, did you? More conversation? No.
No, the only thing I want, I don't know if you, I know you know this, I know you know this, but we tried last year, it was unsuccessful for some reasons. I think we had to recalibrate or refashion, present it slightly differently to have another chance at it. So
yeah, and
it won't come back exactly this game. We'll have to make some tweaks.
Completely, yes.
Okay.
And so I also had spoken with other leg reps in other districts that had suggestions, so I'm going to be reaching out to them as well, and I can touch base with you on that unless anyone is like, no, I want to. Okay. The next one is the funding safe, healthy, contemporary school buildings, update to an existing position. We just want to make sure that the language reflects current needs and aligns with construction funding recommendation from Dr. Holman's superintendent group. And President Guthrie, were you kind of with support from Dr. Holman? Okay.
Yep, and we need to take out the front funding bullet now, since that is no longer needed as legislative advocacy, it is law.
Yes. Soon. Okay, and then transfer of territory. This would be a new position aimed at improving the territory transfer laws so the process is more fair and efficient. President Guthrie has reached out to Riverview and Snoqualmie Valley school districts to coordinate a joint conversation. The hope is to bring forward a proposal all three boards support. So I think we are working on setting a time to meet with their directors. Is there any input?
Yes, and both of them have now indicated interest. And I think one of the shared interests that we've already heard just a little bit is just the time that these processes take. So I'm hoping that we can find some common ground.
Okay, so far. And then inclusion, this would be a new consolidated position that brings together WASDA's values and inclusive practices into one strong statement. Currently, they are split between ML learners and special education. So it's a consolidation and a revision of one that we attempted and an update to an existing position and a new position. So we kind of have all of them here with the four. Did anyone have any other suggestions, thoughts? Okay, so April 27th, we will come with positions and then we will vote on them and then I will submit them. I believe they're due the next day soon. Oh, the 30th. Okay. Yep. So that's how that will work. Okay. I am done.
Thank you, Director Yoakum. The next item on the agenda is school visits and community affairs. This portion of the business meeting of the board is an opportunity for any board members to inform and provide updates from school visits or from organizations or groups they engage with on behalf of LWSD. Are there any updates from the board? Director Richter.
I'm going to have to apologize for this one at 10:15 at night. Sorry, my email is eating itself over here, and my notes disappeared. So, okay, I'm going to ad-lib it. It's going to be fun. No, I'm fine. So I think I'll start with the Dickinson site visit. So on March 17th, Directors Guthrie, Yoakum, and myself, we visited Dickinson Elementary, which is also the same site as Explorer. Superintendent Holman and Associate Superintendent, I think I got that right, Gillingham were also there. We met admin, we visited kindergarten classrooms during their math instruction, and WIN time, W-I-N-N acronym, What I Need Now. And we also visited fifth grade classrooms during their science and social studies lessons. Director Guthrie referred to that earlier. Leadership staff was the principal, Taylor Davis, the AP, Azure, I didn't get a last name. Azure is shared between Dickinson and Wilder due to the enrollment levels at those two schools. I believe it was 354 students on the Dickinson campus, about 50 at Explorer, 300 at Dickinson, 24 languages spoken, most of the MLL services, though, for Spanish-speaking students. I'm skimming a little bit. Admin staff shared what they feel has been very effective for the past few years, which are Tell Me Tuesdays. This was one of their things they were really excited about, which is separate street data level survey that they run with the kids just using Microsoft Forms. Provide to counselors weekly, which can lead to supportive one-on-one follow-up by counselors, et cetera, as needed. I thought that was really cool. Just they're implementing right there. When we went into the classrooms, we saw fifth grade where two teachers had swapped classes. So one was teaching science, the other was teaching social studies. As Director Guthrie mentioned, they were really integrating literacy and writing into both of their lessons. I was not in that class, I was in the other class. What I saw was level of engagement that was really quite high. You know, see a fifth graders all just like literally on the edge of their seat with the hand all the way up. Very excited to be called on. There was building thinking classrooms, reading rope were both being introduced. We saw a lot of that. In the kindergarten classrooms, we got to see intervention time for math, but it wasn't what we expected. It was, instead of like low performers, it was the high performers on a recent test who were performing well above the expected level, 2-digit addition in kindergarten. And the teacher was assessing and figuring out where they were in relation to the curriculum and how to support them. So it was really quite cool to see. We also saw Evergreen Middle School is right next door, and there were students who had come over to support multi-language learners during class time. I thought that was very cool because my kids are at Evergreen and love to see a little partnership. Just thank you to the Dickinson staff on that. I think I'm going to stop there, on Dickinson at least. Is there anyone else who has things? Because I have a couple more. Do that. Come back to me.
I'll follow up with the school visit prior to that. So in the morning, President Guthrie, Director Meekoff, and I had a chance to visit Clara Barton Elementary. From the moment we walked in, we were welcomed with hand-drawn name tags, fresh cinnamon rolls, and personalized cookies. And because it was St. Patrick's Day, we all made sure we were wearing our green, at least most of us. Dr. Heather James is the Barton principal, and Cody Aguirre is a 5th grade teacher and principal intern. They were overseeing our visit and guided us through the school. We started the morning by joining their all-school morning meeting, and this is how every day begins at Barton. Instead of lining up outside, students walk into the commons for a short assembly. Staff told us it's a grounding way for students and adults to connect before the day gets going. I've never seen a school start the day that way, and I really appreciated the intentionality behind it. One of my favorite moments was visiting a 1st grade pod. Students were just settling in after that morning meeting, and I got to watch their kind of classroom morning meeting where they shared how they were feeling using the zones of regulation. What stood out to me was how Barton uses the zones. They don't use it as a behavioral tool, but as a way for students to reflect on their emotions. There's a clear message that all zones are acceptable and that emotions aren't something to avoid or fix. One student shared they were in the yellow zone because they were nervous about getting pinched for not wearing green. I think President Guthrie, mentioned that you had overheard somebody say they were in the yellow as well. Was that you? Yeah, because they weren't celebrating. Oh, was that you as well? Okay, that was you. I don't remember who I spoke to. Because they weren't celebrating St. Patrick's Day the way that they wanted to. So there's a little frustration on both ends. It was just both kind of calling out that yellow zone. It's a simple, honest moment that showed how comfortable students really felt naming those feelings. Another highlight was hearing about the school's equity exchanges. This is during their staff meetings. Teachers work through real scenarios together. They reflect on their practice. They talk through different moments that have happened and find ways to make classrooms more inclusive. Staff shared that these conversations have helped them feel more confident and have created clearer, more consistent expectations across the Barton community. We are always so grateful to staff that opens up their doors for us. So thank you, Barton staff. Thank you for the informative visit, the delicious treats, and the beautiful handmade name tags and cards. It was a joy to spend the morning with you.
Back to Director Richter.
If there's no one else. I'll do a couple, and then you can do a couple if you want. How's that? I should say that on March 5th, I attended the Lake Washington PTSA meeting in this very room, and just did a little bit of education on our governance model, how it differs from the operational responsibilities of the district superintendent and cabinet and staff. Also presented just a little bit on the current work plan of the board, just in the name of increased engagement and understanding of the work of the board. Already talked about the Dickinson site visit. I tend to just go out in the community a fair bit, and I like to attend various things. So for whatever it is worth, for the knowledge of my fellow board members, I did attend both One Redmond's State of the County with Sarah Perry, District 3 Council member and current King County Council Chair, if I'm not mistaken, and then Redmond's State of the City address given by the Redmond Mayor. I just like to interface with different organizations that come to those and are in the same space. I ended up talking with the executive directors of both Lake Washington Symphony Orchestra and Columbia Choirs. So if that is of interest to anyone, please, touch base with me. Also had a chance to talk with Matt Larson, PSC's Local Government Affairs and Public Policy individual. So that was on my mind as well. Also was invited to EHS's Night of Concertos, East Lake High School, so went there and just saw amazing students doing their work, such things as a entire piece written for the full orchestra, written by a student at the school. And, multiple people there are obviously going on to an entire career in this chosen field, so that was just amazing to see. Do you want me to keep going? I have two more, I think. Go for it. Okay. Dr. Rose mentioned the Wanak Open House. It was really fun to attend. I went because I have children of that age, but I figure I might as well badge up since I was on district property. So went around. I can say from my own children that they learned about lots of careers they did not know existed, and that was great. I do want to call out just one, just because of our conversation in the study session earlier about how to integrate education and career opportunities, et cetera, and outdoor learning. Wanak apparently has a new restoration ecology summer class and a restoration ecology and sustainable forestry full year class now through one of our coalition partners in Wanak. And it was great to meet the hosting school district, and the passion that was there was really nice to see. So just things to be thinking about as we're pursuing OE9. All right, last one, I promise. On March 19th, just last week, I got to be a participant at Redmond Council Conversations. Redmond City Council invited board directors to come speak there. I did provide a full summary via email, but wanted to also make sure that the public knew that we were there. Really thought that I really appreciate Redmond City Council offering the opportunity. I greatly enjoyed interfacing, talking to members of the community, and it seemed to bring out a different set of people and a different way of interacting with the public that I found really nice. So if anyone has any questions about any of those, please hit me up.
Director Meekhoff.
Thank you. So I've got a few updates. At the beginning of the month, I had the opportunity to be a judge at the Young Chef competition that was hosted at Juanita High School. Barbara and Pablo also joined me. Sponsored by Nutrition Services, and there were 5 students chosen, I think 60 submissions, and a student from Twain, Ava Shilish, won with these amazing tofu bites. But really, it was all delicious, and I think I say with confidence that they were all better chefs than myself, so I have work to do. And then I attended the Lake Washington Schools Foundation Board of Trustees meeting on the 12th and gave them an update on the awesome work that our student reps did on OE10, and also just informed them on the process for student board rep application so that they can be spreading that information as well. Obviously, they are deep in planning and preparing for Be the Bridge. That is this coming Thursday. I will be there. I think several of us will. And then my last update is that last week I got to be a guest reader at Frost Elementary to celebrate Literacy Week, and I read in a 4th grade classroom and a 2nd grade classroom, and it was my first time at Frost, and beautiful school, and I just really enjoyed engaging with the students. I was really impressed with both classrooms, and we had really great discussions, and we talked about what it means to be a school board member and what that looks like. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, but Director Yoakum and I were at Leadership WASDA. Unfortunately, had to miss the council conversations for that, but well worth it. The topic for this particular session was leading for growth. So talking a lot about growth, ultimately in service of student outcomes, but what does our personal growth look like as board directors? What does our growth, or what do we hope for our board? And then for the entire district system as well. So that was just some really good discussion, reading, and so on. And then our sort of our field trip on Friday was we got to go to the OSPI offices. We met Chris Rakedahl, who's our state superintendent, actually sat down with us for a solid hour and handled a lot of different questions, and it was really interesting to hear concerns from other school board directors and what Superintendent Rakedahl's perspective was on that. OSPI, their offices are in the old Capitol building, which is also just a fascinating building. So to get to visit that, and we walked around and had a little tour afterwards. So thank you to our facilitators who are doing a wonderful job. And our next session is in May. We're going to visit Yakima School District, which I'm really excited to get to see another district in action. And the topic for that one is leadership for all. So that should be just a really, really interesting session that I'm really looking forward to. All right. Anything else on school visits and community affairs? No, we've been busy, my goodness. Any committee updates? No, we've been too busy doing other things. All good. The board plans to meet next on April 6th, 2026 with a 5 p.m. study session and a 7 p.m. board meeting. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the March 23rd, 2026 board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Yoakum that we adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye. Aye. All those opposed, hearing none, motion carries. The meeting is adjourned at 10:30 p.m.